Good evening and warm greetings to all present here. On behalf of Kandalu Shala, we welcome you to the first international seminar on Indian knowledge system. Let me now welcome the Master of Ceremony for the inaugural session, Samskrita Ratnam, Dr. C.S. Radhakrishnan, retired Professor, Central University, Pondicherry, who is also a member of Academic Advisory Board of Kandalu Shala. Over to Professor C.S. Radhakrishnan.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha, Sarvebhyo Namaha. A very good evening to all the distinguished scholars and participants. Suprabhadam, very good morning to our guest of honor, Professor Witzel, and other learned scholars from the West who are joining us through this Zoom meet. I am very happy to extend a warm welcome to all the distinguished scholars for this Panchadivasiya Sastra, 5-day seminar on the Indian knowledge systems, inquiry of roots in the Vedic literature. And also all the participants, I have a great pleasure welcoming them. We commence this program with a Vedic prayer to be rendered by Dr. K.P. Parvati.
Om Samsamidhyuvase vrishannagne vishwanyarya ilaspade samidhyase sano vasunyabhara Sangachadhvam samvadadhvam samvo manam siryanatam Deva bhagai yatha purve sandhyanana upasate samano mantra samiti samani samanam manas Sahachittamesham Samanam mantram abhimantrayeva samanena vohavishayuho Samaniva akutis samana hridayaniva Samanamastu vo mano yathavas Susahasati Viramasta.
Thank you, Dr. Parvati, for that excellent style of the Kerala rendering of the Vedic stanza, which asserts the fact that Samaniva akutihi samana hridayanivaha. All of us here are in the common platform for learning the intricacies of the Vedic mantras. This 5-day seminar itself is organized as part of the activities of the Kandalu Shala, which has been revived now after several years. It was earlier known as the Nalanda of the South India. It was a seat of Vedic learning. And now this has been revived, and so many activities are going on. And this one, a 5-day seminar, is a, I should say, a jewel on the, just a jewel on the head of this Kandalu Shala. And the Pradhana Shishaka, in which all the papers are purported to throw light, is that the Indian knowledge systems, inquiry of roots in the Vedic literature. Just by listening to the Vedic mantras, doesn't mean that we understand the meaning. The Veda itself is Shabda Pradhana Vedaha. And even to try to understand the meaning, not everyone succeeds in that, because the Rig Veda itself makes it very clear. Udatvaha Pashyanne na Dadarsha Vajam, Udatvaha Shrunvanne na Sunotyanam, Udotvasme Tanvam Visashe, Jayeva Patya Ushati Suvasaha. And we all know that the Rig Vedic mantra, Chatvarya Shringaha Trayo Asya Padaha, Dve Shirshe Saptahastasah Asya, Tridha Baddaha Vrishabha Roraviti, Aho Devaha Martyam Avivesha. Niruktakara Yaska himself gives several interpretations. Bhashyakara Patanjali gives more interpretations for this. And the other expression, Chatvari Vak Parimita Padani, Tani Viduhu Brahmanaha Ye Manishinha. And what are these for? Yaska tries to analyze, he says, Katamani Tani Chatvari Padani, Nama Achyata Upasarga Nipadas Cheti Vyakaranaha. That is the view of the grammarians. Mantraha Kalpaha Brahmanam Chaturthi Vyavahariki Iti Yatnikaha. The ritualists have their own way of interpretation. Richaha Yajumshi Samani Chaturthi Vyavahariki Iti Neiruktaha. And the etymologists, they come forward with their own interpretation of the four. Pashushu Tunaveshu Mrigeshu Atmanija Iti Atma Pravada. So we find that for the same mantra, different interpretations are given by scholars who are well versed in their own field. That's why this particular saying, Vedaha Agilaha Dharma Moolam, we need to say Vedaha Agilaha Shastra Moolam. It is the root of all the Shastras. That's why this inquiry of roots in the Vedic literature is a very apt title that has been given. And we are, as part of the members of the board of the Kantalushala, very glad to welcome all the distinguished scholars and guests of honor and all the participants who I am sure will be very much benefited by the deliberations commencing today, and it will go on for another 5 days. And first of all, I welcome Dr. P.C. Murli Madhavan, my own esteemed good friend, to give the presidential paper. Professor Murli Madhavan is the special officer of the Kantalushala, is the chairman of the Kunjuni Raja Academy of Indological Research. We have been from our student days for the past 5 decades together in many of the academic ventures. He has a vast experience of nearly 45 years of teaching and research. He has guided nearly 25 scholars for their doctorate. He has authored 20 books, and he has been honored with the Certificate of Merit from the President of India in 2017. And he is also the member of the syndicate of the Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit. And he has been a dynamic force behind the activities of the Kantalushala. Now I invite him to render his presidential paper. Professor Murli Madhavan.
Sarvan Abhivadaye. You can hear?
Yes, yes.
Sarvan
Not,
Abhivadaye.
So your video is not available.
Video is not there?
Yes. Video is not visible.
Yeah. Now.
Now, fine.
Video has come?
Yes, yes. Please go ahead.
Sarvan Abhivadaye. Kantalushala Samsthaya Aidam Prathamyena Ayojite Asmin Antarashtra Charcha Sammelane Asmagam Amandranam Angikritya Atra Antarjala Vedikayam Sannihidebhyaha Sarvebhyaha Vidwadvarebhyaha सादरं कान्दालूर्शालायाः अभिवादन कुसुमाञ्जलिं वितनोमि। महदिदम् आमोदस्थानं यत् भारतीय ज्ञान संप्रदायानां वैदिक वाङ्मय मूलम् अन्विष्य क्रियमाणे अस्मिन् चर्चा सम्मेलने न केवलं भारतीयाः किन्तु विदेशीयाः बहवः पण्डिताः तत्त्वान्वेषिणः सन्निहिताः सन्ति इति मोमुद्यते मे मनः। धन्यमात्मानं मन्ये यत् कान्दलूर्शाला नामिकायाः अस्याः केरलदेशस्थ शोधसंस्थायाः कार्यभारं वोढुम् अवसरो मम लब्ध इति। प्रथमं तावत् जगद्गुरून् श्रीशंकर भगवत्पादान् गुरु परम्परां च नमस्कृत्य अन्ताराष्ट्र संविधानेन आयोजितस्य अस्य सारस्वत यज्ञस्य मंगलारंभं कुर्मः। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादशङ्करं लोकशङ्करम्। सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। विश्वं दर्पणदृश्यमाननगरीतुल्यं निजान्तर्गतं पश्यन्नात्मनि मायया बहिरिवोद्भूतं यथा निद्रया। यः साक्षात् कुरुते प्रबोधसमये स्वात्मानमेवाद्वयं तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नम इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये। Dear scholars, sisters and brothers, first of all, may I salute the entire academic community present in this international seminar on Indian knowledge systems, inquiry of roots in Vedic literature on virtual platform. I am happy and proud to declare that more than 600 research scholars and teachers registered in this international seminar within 48 hours. It gives Kaandaloorshala a great momentum and a great amount of confidence in our academic activities. I take this opportunity to welcome all seekers of knowledge to this great institution. I would like to specially mention the names of Professor Mikhail Witzel, Professor Peter Scharf, Professor George Cardona, Professor C.L. Prabhakar, Professor Radhavallabha Tripathi, Professor G.U. Dhite, Professor Shashi Tiwari, Dr. Bhagilata Pataskar, Dr. K. Srinivasan for their contributions in organizing such a meaningful academic event. They all present in this seminar and they will be leading the sessions and discussions. At the outset, I may request you all, the participants of this seminar, to attend the presentation of papers and actively participate in discussions. We should pledge together that we will not waste time in discussing irrelevant matters and unwanted things. Let us pray, Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Right from the very inception of Kaandaloorshala, last December 2020, it is only 7 months over now. Kaandaloorshala, we could organize several serious programs in the field of higher studies and research in Vedic studies, in Darshana systems, theater studies, etymology, phonetics, and so on and so forth. As you all are aware, the erstwhile Kandalur University has several thrust areas in their academic endeavors. Among such areas of the Vedic Vikriti Patha, that is Krama Patha, had a vital role. Getting a high percentage of marks in the Krama Vara examination was considered in this erstwhile university as a minimum qualification, rather a basic qualification for an aspirant to seek admission in Kandalur Shala. There was entrance test at that time. We are talking about from 3rd BC to 800 AD. And in the process of this renaissance of this such a great erstwhile university, we have decided to inaugurate the revival projects with a Kramavara, because that much significance is there for Kramavara. So we started a Kramavara in the month of December, and we have organizing several Vakyartha studies at regular intervals. This was the feature, the unique feature of Kandalur Shala, that Vakyartha studies at regular intervals, organizing Vakyartha studies at regular intervals is another feature of this Kandalur Shala. Quite different from the practice now prevailing. Kandalur Shala used to invite scholars in various Shastras, and they stay months together to conduct Shastra studies regularly in the university. They stay in the university for months, the scholars. Not like nowadays, scholars, they come in the morning and they go by evening. They stay there. All facilities are provided to them. They mingle with the students and the teachers, conduct regularly the Shastra studies, and the outcome of such a discussion and the findings of such discussions will collect, and a new textbook will be written and published in each discipline. This type of practice nowadays we can come across in several universities in modern disciplines. Nowadays we have that. But even before Christ, this type of live academic discussion of scholars and birth of a new composition of a Sastra text work following the discussions are something unique, and Kandalur University is a pioneer in this field. There were 32 departments in erstwhile Kandalur Shala at the peak of its glory. This number is double when we compare to other ancient universities like Padalipura, Pathivapura, Nalanda, Takshashila, and so on. It is clearly stated in copper plates and also in stone inscriptions excavated that the leading university, Pathivapura, and several other universities also in South, was started following the academic discipline known as Kandalur Mari. Historians recorded that Kandalur Shala had this, and the one at Vizhinjam, very near to Thiruvananthapuram, was for students getting training in military services, military training for using that force, using that students' force at the time of emergency of the nation. See, to that extent, for the welfare of the nation, the students are being trained in such a way. The history of Kandalur has been unearthed right from 3rd century BC, and it continues up to 7th century AD. The present Tamil Nadu state also had campuses of Kandalur Shala. Brilliant students got several opportunities to specialize in various subjects, even subjects like ship technology, shipbuilding, etc. At that time, other universities and pathashalas were regularly approached Kandalur Shala for campus recruitments to get highly specialized people in several disciplines. Equal weightage was given by the academicians in the university for departments of physics and metaphysics. At present, in the stage of its revival, we academicians should work hard to imbibe all good practices, both in academic and administrative affairs that prevailed in Kandalur Shala. Our desire is to revive this great tradition of the Kandalur Shala in tune with the requirements of present modern society. We encourage interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary studies, and for that we will be always organizing a face-to-face dialogue, interdialogues between tradition and modernity. There is no distinction like old or new as far as knowledge is concerned. tradition or modern, in the case of seeking knowledge. It is a continuous process, but a kind of fusion is required, a healthy synthesis of ancient and modern wisdom for the welfare of the universe. So Kandharushala is committed for that. Now, coming to my subject, my paper, due to the positive time, I will be giving only salient features or some points, main points of my paper. The Vedangas, which are non-revealed texts, which worked as a transition in the history of Vedic literature. I'll be talking. The Vedangas are the first non-revealed texts attached to the Vedic literature. They are ancillary in character. The problem regarding the nature of their content arises not so much in the text on grammar, etymology, prosody, astronomy. They are strictly sciences, or shiksha, or even shulba texts. But as in the Shrauta, Grihya, and Dharma Sutras, the Vedanga texts on grammar, etymology, prosody, and also in shiksha, they regulate the correct pronunciation and understanding of the Vedic texts. The very fact that towards the beginning of the first millennium, millennium AD, these texts began to be written. That means it is revealed. It is not revealed, it is unrevealed. It has been written physically by scholars and began to be written. This indicates that they say that for some reason or other, there was difficulty in understanding and pronouncing the Vedic text correctly. The Vasishtha Dharma Sutra mentions that there is a quotation that it's not a quotation, it is just a fact that what I want to quote here, that illiterate Brahmins, they cut short the period of learning of Vedic studies, which they throughout the year they used to study Vedas. That has been cut short to 4.5 months. Clearly, one reason for this decline of Vedic studies and of correct pronunciation of the scripture is the southward and eastward advancement of the Aryans to regions where various dialects of Dravidian and Ostric were spoken. Another was the presence of several foreign invaders, most of whom spoke alien languages. The Atri Dharma Sutra mentions several invaders named Shaka, Yavana, Bahlika, Kamboja, Kasha, Vanga, and Parasha. Such several names are there. Still more names are there. Most of these are names of foreign invaders who came to India between the close of the first millennium BC and the beginning of the second. Other sutra works register the presence of non-Indian Aryan speaking invaders who settled in India. In this context, we have a better understanding of prayers like, there are several prayers we see in those works, that may I be able to form the vowels. This is one prayer. To produce, to hold fast, to utter the guttural, the dental, and the labial sounds. So at that time, people have become what we saw in dark about the pronunciation of this Vedic text, and they could not, and they have to prayer. They have to conduct prayer. They are pleading. Hence, we know we now have a dictum that the alien languages should not be learned. only Vedic language and Sanskrit should be learned. The composition of the Shilpa Sutras in verse, composition in meter, is another sign of their literary lateness. Late meters also, even among meters, the late meters are used in several sutras. All these show that they are what we call very recent works. And the late meters are used in several sutras, and technical terms from later philosophical treatises, as well as a new vocabulary, also attest to the presence of non-Indo-Aryan speakers and a rapid miscegenation that is called Varna Sankara, leading to linguistic changes. Foreign invasions and the advance of the Aryans themselves in the hitherto unvisited that lands, which brought them into contact with the linguistic problems, was itself an incentive for the composition of grammar, etymology, shiksha, and prosody. So these are written works. In his discussion of the Pradishakyas, Dr. Suryakant says they point to a period when Vedic literature was being fast committed to writing, and the script being yet in a state of flux. Rules. It was not hard and fast rules were not there, which can appeal only to those students who learn the grammatical studies, yet want to learn their samhitas with the help of patchwork and makeshift like Atharva. Because of the actual corruption and the fear of further corruption, the custodians of the Vedic lore codified rules for correct pronunciation, grammar, accent, and prosody in a despite bid to preserve what still remained comparatively intact. We noticed that there was then a growing dearth of Vedic scholars. That is also the from the text, internal evidence, external evidence, internal evidences of the text, sutra text. Vedic scholars in the appendix of the Parishishta of the Paraskara Grihya Sutra, one reads, Vedic scholars are to be appointed. If there is a dearth of scholars, one should put at least one at the head of the row. And or in a crisis, a Brahmin should take Vedic lessons from a Kshatriya or even from a Vaishya and should follow him from behind. These are the quotations I am giving. So how the deterioration have happened, to what extent, that I want to explicitly make it clear by these quotations. The study and understanding of the Vedas were evidently on the wane during this period, and the formal texts like grammar, etc., attempt to salvage what still remained. But once these auxiliary texts were codified, they assumed a life of their own, which went far beyond their initial scope. They became secular subjects in which even laymen took an interest, presumably for the sake of other secular, that is, literary honors, which were cultivated then. Shilpa Sutras and astronomy too soon snapped their umbilical ties with the Vedas, naval relation with the Vedas, and provoked full-fledged study of geometry for secular architecture and astronomy for the growing maritime trade. Even the Shrauta Sutras did not remain unchanged through the ages. And due to paucity of time, I'm not giving explanations in other things that can be done later. So here, even the Shrauta Sutras did not remain unchanged through the ages. Most of the Vedangas, they have showed the clear history of how they have departed from the core theme of Vedas, and they became secular, and they, as I mentioned earlier, that connected to maritime and also to the secular architecture, etc. There has been a gradual evolution in the sacrificial religion from the period of Brahmanas to that of the Prayogakaras. The authority of the older Shruti texts was gradually waning, and in the middle of the first millennium BC, they had ceased to influence the development of Hindu social thought and institutions from 500 BC. Not only is there a proliferation of Shrauta rites with time, a gradual fading out of older gods, laying down rules for sacrifice, say, about the Mahavrata, etc. Several Shrauta sutras laying down rules for sacrifice, say, about the Mahavrata, as I mentioned. The antiquated and obsolete rite should not be performed. This has been mentioned. This dictum proves that the attitude to sacrifices was not static. Some older ones were losing what we call favor, while a host of new rites, when the older, which have some naval relation with the Vedic lore, when they fade and go behind the practices, then slowly some new groups of rites, they appear in the scene. They are non-sacrificial. They have no connection with sacrifices, yajnas, were coming into vogue. We now we now hear of new rites like Phalguni Karman, Dakshayana, Gonamika, Anugrahika. There are several names of the sacrifices. And even Vinayaka Kalpa, Shashti Kalpa, Shadahuta Homa, and even what we very popular nowadays, Narayana Bali. All these religious rites, as a group, they appeared in the scene. In the Sutra period, the Vedic sacrifice is clearly not only the religious ritual that practiced by the society. There are several practices, and the practices of sacrifices is one among the some 3 or 4 practices are that is one. Nor the only mode of worship. This sacrifice is not only the only mode of worship sanctioned by the authority. We have quite elaborate rites described in the Rigvedana and several Grihya and Dharma Sutras, which mentioned puja as a valid mode of worship. The first time in the history we see the word puja and the religious rites called puja as a valid mode of worship. Puja in these texts is basically what it is today. It presupposes temples, images, non-Vedic oblations, and even ingredients. The ingredients which they use in yajna and other things, all these things totally changed. Faith in Vishnu and Narayana is extolled also in Vaikhanasa Dharma Prashna. We now hear of the ritual use in the rituals. Ritual use of sandalwood, a proof of the southward advancement of the Aryans. Now, the red sandalwood, bilwa flowers, flowers means leaves, and these things figure in many rites. the puja of Hari is now performed. That has appeared and performed with the salagrama stone as a symbol. So there first we see the salagrama puja and other things. The Vedic sacrifice knew no temples. The Vedic sacrifice knew no temples. People then cleared a plot of ground. Sometimes they raised that ground and spread the kusha grasses on it and invoked the gods in that place. But in many Vedanga passages, we have clear, unambiguous references to temples and the like. The Ashalayana Shravada Sutra says that in the context of animal sacrifice, that the sacrificer sends the oblation with the instruction to take it to the place sacred to that god so that it reaches him. The same text again says that God's houses should be done the pradikshina. The supplementary the rite of pradakshina, doing pradakshina in the temple, the first occurs in this place, in this what we call Paraskara, Grihya Sutra. That is the supplementary sections of the Paraskara Grihya Sutra shows that rules for digging tanks, wells, ponds, and for constructing temples. Now, the Paraskara Sutra, which I have mentioned earlier, itself mentions that Indra's house rich in wealth. Some references this is in connection with the housewarming rites. The Kriya Kanda of the Gautama Sutra says that soil from a temple is not to be used for cleansing oneself. Gautama Dharma Sutra mentions the temple also. Now, this whole concept of a permanent residence of the god on earth, that is temple, is foreign to this idea is foreign to the Vedic sacrifices, in which no place was sacred to any god. A place was sanctioned, and in the course of most sacrifices, many gods were supposed to come there to be praised, offered oblations, and solicited for favor. So gods in the Vedic sacrifices were imagined as disembodied spirits who were, however, praised in the anthropomorphic manner. But now in the Vedanga literature, we hear of images. Madhuradatta, while commenting on Hiranya Grihya Sutra, and also you see Haradatta, who also comment on Avastamba Grihya Sutra, says that both places we see this statement, says that in the Sulagava sacrifice, Ishana, Midhushi, and Jayanda were worshipped in icons. These are the gods. Clear mention of images is found in many passages. Thus, we hear of what one should do if the image should burn or break. So all these statements are discussions are there. Iconic worship of gods is described in great detail in the ritual section of the Gautama Sutra. The Vaidana Sutra describes Narayana Puja in a recognizably modern way. There is no much difference what we are doing now also. Here too, Narayana's icon is worshipped. The Rigvedana prescribes iconic worship of the folk deities with lotuses, sandal paste, mustard oil, and bilva flowers. Interestingly enough, many of the gods thus worshipped are late arrivals of foreign in origin. Suddenly, in the Sutra literature, one notices a whole host of new names of deities. The Bharadwaja Grihya Sutra mentions quite new gods at the Jyotishtoma, that performance. There is the name, some very interesting names are there. Perhaps many of the people have not heard the names even. Swana, Bhaja, and Bambari, Hasta, Sauhasta. That is, several names are there. However, belong to these, however, belong to the earliest period of eclecticism. And now coming to the another part of this what we call Shrauta, Grihya, and Dharma Sutras, we see evil spirits figure quite as importantly as gods. For child welfare, the rights have to ward off many such malevolent spirits. We have several lists of such names. If we classify and analyze the names, we notice that most are Indo-Aryan, although some are unintelligible, presumably because they Indo-Aryanized foreign names, while others are clearly foreign. Thus, Shanda and Marka, we in Bhagavad and other things we say Shanda Marka. Maybe the similarity of the name cannot be treated as that they are the same, but still there are some chances. The gods became mallas in the when the time succeeded, and the Shanda and Marka are from Iran. Actually, they are the gods of Iran. They figure in the Avesta, while the Kupani, one of the 6 Kritikas, now an evil spirit, is also foreign, possibly Middle Eastern, as is perhaps that Shishita. Another category may be very old Aryan or non-Aryan Catholic spirits, perhaps of a different origin. While now I will come to my conclusion of my paper, the problem that arrives is why are the texts which deal with non-Vedic modes of worship and penance called Vedangas, limbs of the Vedas? This is the question. These are non-Vedic, perhaps, non-Aryan and non-Vedic. I submit that this is so because like the Brahmanas, these texts sought to become a compendium of normative rules for the religious life of the entire country. But while the Brahmanas had been merely syncretistic and had Aryanized the non-Aryan myths and rituals by finding place for them in the expanding the elaborate corpus of Aryan myths and rituals, thus preserving a recognizable homogeneity, the sutras failed to do so. Society in the sutra period was no longer homogeneous. Religious life flowed in 3 independent streams, each as authentic as the other. Sacrifice was no longer the only valid mode of religious practice. Hence, desperate, mutually exclusive sections are juxtaposed in the Sutra, Grihya, and Dharma Sutras period. Since These contain recognized foreign elements of benefits and practices alien to the Vedic religion. The Vedangas are not regarded as revealed, not as apaurushaya. They are paurushaya, so to say. This is striking because the priests withdraw the aura which attaches to the Vedas, its revealed nature from this literature, although it apparently strives to preserve the holy lore intact. The reason is the same as not allowing the Shudra the right to study the Vedas, that is, the presence of the non-Vedic, non-Aryan element in it. But more significant is the fact that they are called Vedanga, limbs or parts of the Vedas. The reason is perhaps not far to seek, because they are neither a recognized ecclesia, that is Dharma Sangha, nor a codified scripture for these proto Puranic puja sections, because the Puranas themselves had not yet been composed, and because emergent Hinduism had not yet wrested recognition and respectability from society for those sections. Those sections had to be incorporated in the existing corpus of religious literature, even at the cost of contradiction and incongruity in their content. With these some observations, I beg to remain. Thank you. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, Professor Murli Madhavan. In your presidential address, you have covered a vast subject area, starting with how this Kandalu Shala had this concept of the residential school, the Andevasitwa, and how it had the 32 departments, and how the Vedangas did not merely stop with explaining the Vedic passages and their significance, but extended or rather encompassed other fields of knowledge also. And I'm sure everybody is very much benefited by your presidential paper. Now, I have great pleasure in inviting respected Professor Sannidhanam Sudarshana Sarmaji, Vice Chancellor of Sri Venkateshwara Vedic University. Professor Sannidhanam Sudarshana Sharma has the best of both, namely of the traditional learning and the modern approach. He learned the Krishna Yajurveda and Mimamsa from his father. He learned Shukla Yajurveda from Ganesha Ganapadikal. He learned Purva Mimamsa from Dongri Shastriji. And he has been in the teaching faculty of the Rashtriya Sanskrit Vidyapith in Tirupati, to start with as a lecturer, then assistant professor, then head of the department, and for nearly 1 decade now as the Vice Chancellor. So he has a vast experience of more than 4 decades of teaching and Sanskrit and also research in Sanskrit. He has guided nearly 32 scholars for their PhD and MPhil. He has authored 4 books and edited as many as 80 books for that matter. And he has been a dynamic Vice Chancellor of the Sri Venkateshwara Vedic University at Tirupati. And he was conferred with the title Veda Ratnam by the Kanchi Kamakoti Mutt in Kanchipuram. He was conferred with the title of Veda Nidhi by the Waves, the Hindu University of America. And the title Vidya Vajaspati was conferred on him by the Akhila Bharatiya Vidyat Parishad at Varanasi. And above all, we are really very fortunate to have him as a member of the Academic Advisory Board of the Kandalu Shala. And we have very great pleasure, sir, in inviting you to deliver your inaugural paper on Vedas, the intonations and the interpretations. Professor Sannidhanam Sudarshana Sharmaji.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om. Namo Brahmane Namo Astvagnaye Namo Prithivye Namo Oshadhibhyah Namo Vache Namo Vachaspataye Namo Vishnave Brahate Karomi Namo Mahadhyah Om Namo Vedatmakaya Venkateshwaraya. Respected scholars participating in this webinar, my dear friends and organizers, my hearty congratulations to all of you for successfully streamlining the activity of Kantalur Sala in such a short period of time and arranging this webinar with the cluster of or galaxy of scholars, not only from India but also from the foreign countries. My sincere congratulations and thanks to Professor Murali Madhavan, who has been my learned friend since several decades. My sincere thanks to Professor Radhakrishnan, whom I have met some time back, and I'm delighted to see him on the screen today. Well, sirs and madams, coming to the present topic, today I want to touch two aspects. One is the oral transmission of Vedas. The other one is the interpretations based on those Vedic texts. With regard to the original texts of Apaurusheya Vedas, we learn from Mahabhashya that by that time there were 1131 branches of Vedas by the time of Patanjali. We don't know how many more were there before that. But today, as we see, we have only 8 in our hand. Only eight branches are available to us, which means we are having only 0.7% of Vedic literature. See, by this you can assess how much loss we suffered. The present fully available Vedic branches are one branch from the Rig Veda, and then 3 branches from Yajurveda, 3 branches from Samaveda, and 1 branch from Atharva Veda. Only 8 branches are available to us in their full form. What I mean to say is Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, Upanishad. These are the 3 chapters or these are the 4 chapters or books of a particular branch of. Only with regard to these 8 branches, we will get all the literature. Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, and Upanishad. With regard to the others, as I already told you, it is a very pathetic scene that we have lost so many branches of Vedas. Now, what to be done today? Lamenting on the loss is not the solution. We are getting, fortunately, some fragments of some Vedas. For example, the Maitrayaniya Shakha, Maitrayaniya Samhita is available. This branch belongs to Yajurveda, Maitrayaniya. And then another branch is Shankhayana. Shankhayana belongs to Rigveda. We get it in a piece, in a fragmental method, in a fragmental mode. So also the Paipalada Shakha of Atharva Veda. They are getting the text, but there is no swara. They just, some of the Pandits of Paipalada, they just recite it as Vagartha, Vasam Prakta, Vagartha, like Anust. There must have been a swara, but that was lost. Only Paipalada Samhita is available. No other chapters or books of that Veda are available to us. So also Katha, Kapisthala Katha, and then so many are there. If our scholars take up a program to search for them in reputed manuscript libraries, maybe at Adayar, Madras Oriental Government Manuscript Library, and in Kerala also there are so many. In Trivandrum there is a huge manuscript collection, and in ancient Rajas' palaces, so many texts of Vedas were preserved. So if we take up a program to search for the last fragments of the Vedas, so that we can easily reconstruct a full-fledged Veda, that will be our fresh contribution to the Vedic literature, so as to say, to the world by and large. So a huge search has to be undertaken to identify the last fragments of the Vedas. Maitrayaniya, Shankhayana, Paipalada, Katha, Kapisthala Katha, and so on. In recent times, a learned scholar of India, Professor B.B. Choube, who has been located at Vishweswarananda Vedic Research Institute, Hoshiarpur, has done a lot of things. He has brought out one Ashwalayana Samhita that belongs to Rigveda. He could only get the text of Samhita. Other texts are not available. So I cite Professor B.B. Choube only to encourage our scholars. It is not impossible. I mean to say that it is not impossible if we put our heart and soul on a particular mission. Our young promising scholars are bound to get success. The example is Professor B.B. Choube. And then another aspect I want to bring to the notice of the honorable galaxy of Vedic scholars. In Rigveda, we have the Vikriti Pathas up to the level of Ghana, up to the topmost level. In Krishna Yajurveda Taittiriya Shakha, in Kanva Shakha of Shukla Yajurveda, in Madhyandana Shakha of Shukla Yajurveda, also we get this type of Vikriti Patha. Even now, they are in vogue, they are studied, they are taught only in respect of 4 Vedas. When we come to Samaveda branches, Padanta Samavedaka, Padanta, only up to the level of Pada. Pada is not even considered as the Vikriti Patha. Vikriti Patha starts from Krama. Pada is natural. When there is Sandhi, when we make it Visandhi, then Pada is derived by itself. No particular effort is needed. But with regard to Krama and other Vikritis, particular effort is to be added by mixing the words so that they are called Vikritis. Why Samaveda should not have Dhajo, Dando, Ratho, Ghanaha from the Kramapatha onwards? Why they have gone away? Why they have disappeared? So can we reconstruct the Kramapatha, Dhaja, Ratha, Danda, Ghana, etc. Vikriti Pathas with regard to the Samaveda or not? We have to try. I'm not just delivering a meaningless speech. We have made some experiments in Sri Venkateswara Vedic University. With regard to Atharva Veda, we don't have even the Padapatha. We don't have even the Padapatha with us. Of course, the Vishweswarananda Vedic Research Institute at Hoshiarpur, while publishing Rasayana's Bhashya of Atharva Veda, they have given the text of Padapatha. But it is not fully available. In the Vedic University, a team of scholars, including some Ganapatis and Pandits of Pratishakyas, they worked for 4 years and reconstructed the Padapatha of Atharva Veda, which is being taught in Vedic University, Tirupati. We are trying to build up the Kramapatha of Atharva Veda, which has gone out of practice, to bring back. So, with regard to the Samaveda branches and Atharva Veda branches, it is the responsibility of the existing Vedic scholars to rebuild the last tradition of Vikriti Pathas and reintroduce them. After all, the Vikriti Patha is to protect the original text. So they are without the firewall. So we have to build a firewall for the protection of the existing texts of Samaveda and Atharva Veda. For that purpose, we have to rebuild the Vikriti Pathas and reintroduce in teaching learning process. That is one more idea which struck in my mind. And to some extent, we have been successful in this regard. Coming to the point of Vedic interpretations, we are getting bhashyas of Sayana mainly because it is available with all the 4 branches of Vedas, and some bhashyas of Venkatadhari and other Venkatanadhava and others on Rigveda. If we search in the manuscript libraries, we will definitely get some more bhashyas. May not be on the full branch, but in fragments, on particular suktas. Why? Because it is our experience that in Purusha Sukta, we have so many commentaries on Purusha Sukta. And on Nasadiya Sukta also, we have innumerable number of commentaries, both traditional and modern. In this manner, if we search for the last bhashyas on Vedic texts, it is not impossible for us to get them back, study them, and understand the Vedic texts in a better fashion. The Rishar Darshana, I am not underestimating the present scholars, their scholarship, or their way of interpretation. It is certainly to be honored. It is certainly to be taken as pramana, no doubt. But there is a difference. For example, those sages who have composed their bhashyas on Vedic texts, my learned friend, the president, who just concluded his presidential address, has been referring to the Paurushaya and Apaurushaya. Who commented on the Apaurushaya Veda? They are called Rishir Darshana. They can see what we cannot see. So their vakyas, their sentences, their statements are pramana for us. Prama yathartha jnana. Yathartha jnanam nayanti iti pramana. So let us search for the bhashyas of rishis in this regard. In the texts of Vedas for which we are not getting the bhashyas. And at the same time, there is a need to popularize Vedic study. How to do it? A particular subject becomes so popular when people take interest in it. If it is not interesting, nobody will take up the study of Vedas. So how to generate interest? That is the responsibility of the Vedic scholars today. It is the responsibility of the Vedic scholars to generate interest among the circles of intelligentsia. For that purpose, one of the ways is to bring out or to unearth the scientific factors in the Vedas. Vedic physics, Vedic mathematics, Vedic chemistry, the chemistry based on the Vedic text. We have introduced Vedic mathematics. We have also introduced Vedic physics. A lot of things are told about the astronomy and the gravity, the theory of gravity. The theory of gravity is discussed in Aranyaka. Yene me vidhrute ubhe. Ubhe means the Juloka and the Prithvi is the Adholoka. The upper worlds are not falling down on the earth, and the earth is also not falling below. They are moving in their respective places. How they are hold? Yene me vidhrute ubhe, the upper worlds and the downward worlds, they are in their respective places, controlled by a force. What is that force? Vishnuna vidhrute bhumi iti vatsasya vedana. There is a force which is called Vishnu. Vishu Vyaptam. Vishu Vyaptam. It controls the upper worlds and the worlds down. Holds both of them. That's why Vyaptatvatu Vishnu ityuchyate. That is the gravity. Another interesting passage we come across in Shatamata Brahmana. Once upon a time, the upper world and the earth both were together like two parts of a seed. Dvidala, a pulse seed. A pulse, Bengal gram or something. Green gram, pulse seed. They were together. And at the command of the creator, they separated. And the upper part went up. The lower part remained here. Before their partition, both the parts, they discussed together. We are getting separated permanently. I need something from you to remember you. So the earth gave sands to the upper world gave sands to the earth. and the earth gave the fertile soil of ant hills to the upper world. So that earth, that piece of earth which was presented by Bhumi to the moon, now looks as a mark. Also, there is another passage. After some time, when the Kali Yuga progresses, there won't be place for rituals, Vedic rituals, and all the deities thought that we will have to live without food. So they thought, even at that crucial time, the Vedic rituals should continue, and they should continue to get their food. That's why they cut a piece of earth and placed it on the moon, where the Vedic rituals can be performed even at the crucial time of fourth pada of Kali Yuga. Now we are in the Pratham. So, with a foresight, they have kept a piece of earth on the moon. So, this gives an idea that man can live on the earth as if he is living on the man can live on the moon as if he is living on the earth. So, this type of interesting things, Eka Ashwame Kadhuram, Eka Chakrame Karatham, the chariot of sun, the chariot of sun is one mode, and it is a monocle with single wheel. So this type of interesting things are found in the Vedic texts, and if we can successfully present them to the public, they will take interest in the Vedas, and definitely the Vedas will gain their past glory. There is no doubt. Veda is not a language, but it is a subject. While Sanskrit is a language, Veda is a subject. This is only a subject. But the treasure of Veda is hidden in a big iron box, and the key is nothing but Sanskrit. Through Sanskrit, you have to approach Vedas. And while approaching, one should be very cautious, and there should not be any misinterpretations. As the rishis, they caution us, Vibhet Chalpashrutadvedo Mamayam Praharishyati, Mamayam Pratarishyati. So let us unearth the scientific factors and present them to the public in the right spirit. In this regard, we in the Vedic University are ready to cooperate with similar organizations like Katlu, Sala. It is the responsibility of this type of organizations to offer something, to contribute something to the society through Vedas. I once again thank Professor Murali Madhavan, Professor Radhakrishnan and all other participants for patiently listening to me. And also, I am thankful to the organizers of Control Sala for providing me an opportunity to interact with you in this inaugural session. Thank you, one and all. Namaskar.
Dhanyavadaha. Thank you very much, Professor Sandhidanam Sudarshan Sharmaji, for your excellent paper, the inaugural paper, wherein you explained about how Patanjali had mentioned about 1,131 branches, but now only 8 shakas are available. But there is no point in just lamenting over the lost shakas. But if there's efforts are made by the younger generation of scholars, there is still hope that many of these shakas can be retrieved. And you have very beautifully cited the instance of Professor D.B. Chaubey of Hoshiarpur, how he brought out that one particular shaka. And in this context, I am also reminded of one fact. that the Paipalata Samhita, one manuscript earlier collected by Professor Roth, it was deposited in the Heidelberg University, and one Professor Gunther Müller, he had taken a CD copy of that and gifted that to the Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts, because that is the only manuscript, and in order to preserve that, that was a good gesture on his part. Similarly, the present day research scholars, as advised by you, should take up Vedic studies. We have to encourage that, because there are still a lot of hope that some of the shakas will be retrieved, and how the interpretation of the Veda is also equally important, because Sanskrit is a language, Veda is a subject. Very rightly you pointed out, because some of the scientific facts, as you said, Yame Vidrite Ube, the two worlds, and this is reflected again in the Nyaya Vaisheshika system. Adya Padana Asamavaye Karanatvam Gurutvam, the first instance of falling, Gurutva. So that is what we call as a gravitational force. So unless the present generation is told about this, we are trying to inquire into the Vedic literature. That is our Vedaha, Agilaha, Dharma Moolam, Shastra Moolam cha. So it has been a very enlightening talk by you, Professor Sharmaji, and I am sure all of us, particularly all the participants and research scholars, will be very much benefited by that. And on behalf of the Kantalu Shala, we thank you profusely from our hearts. Thank you so much, sir. Now, we are very fortunate to have a special lecture by our guest of honor, Professor Michael Witzel. He's a professor of Wales, professor of Sanskrit in the Harvard University, Boston, USA. Professor Witzel needs no introduction to this world of scholars, of Indologists and Sanskrit scholars. He had his graduation, post-graduation in Germany. In Tübingen, University of Tübingen, he did his graduation and MA in the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg in Germany. And he started his career in teaching way back in 1972 as assistant professor of Indology at Tübingen, and later on at the University of Leiden at Netherlands. He was a visiting professor earlier in the Harvard University for 1 year, and from 1987 onwards, he has been occupying the much decorated seat of the Wales Professor of Sanskrit at the Harvard University. He has been doing pioneering work in Vedic studies, and he has been a driving force in many of the high-level committees in Nepal, in Kyoto, in Paris. He has been the founder editor of the Indo-Iranian Journal and the Harvard Oriental Series, and he has done a lot of work on the comparative mythology. And it is really our very good fortune that Professor Michael Witzel has found time to join as a special invited guest of honor and to deliver a lecture on the historicity of the Vedas. Now I request Professor Michael Witzel to please present his special lecture. Professor Witzel.
Namaskaram. I'm very happy to be with you in Kerala again, if only virtually. I remember very well the stay at the Atiratra Adnichayana in 2011, and then the International Vedic Workshop in 2014. So I'm happy to continue in this fashion at least. So thank you very much for your invitation, especially Professor Murali Madhavan. And now I will will proceed to my PowerPoint. I hope you can see it.
Yes.
Just a second.
We can see.
Yes, thank you. I just missed the. something is interfering, I'm sorry. Yeah. So as I say in the introduction, I will talk about the historicity of the Veda, and the subtitle is a multidisciplinary approach, because this is, I think, what we need. Because the historicity of the Veda, or the actual existence of the Vedas, has been denied by some, because for millennia the Vedas have only been transmitted orally and in writing only for the last 1,000 years or so. And others, of course, have pushed back the Veda to 3102 or even earlier. So we have two different positions. So I will try to navigate between these, and will use multidisciplinary evidence for the early texts, that is especially the Rig Veda, around 1200 BCE. More about that later on. Because of that, of course, my talk will not be looked at favorably by the intellectual and political left. For instance, the case of the river Saraswati, which is doubted by some, and while it is clearly mentioned in the river theme of Rig Veda Book 10, and certainly also not by the right, and also not by traditional Pandits, if they don't venture out of their books. However, extremely well they study these texts. So I'm, as we say in German, I'm sitting between all the chairs here. So my aim is to find out, to distill what is actually contained in the Vedas based on a multidisciplinary approach. More about that in a minute. Of course, since I actually am a student of Indology or Indian studies, especially the Vedas, I cannot be a specialist in the various sciences from archaeology to zoology. But I must say we have tried to have an interdisciplinary approach in our yearly roundtables at Harvard for 15 odd years, between the textual study, linguistics, archaeology, and also genetics. And I've tried to keep up with that. So here I will present some of those data. So as I say, we need a multidisciplinary approach from those fields. They must be examined critically, as I said, by interdisciplinary dialogue. I have two or three preliminary points, since the term Arya is very much discussed and disputed. In India, we usually speak of Aryans, but Arya is actually the self-designation of Iranians and, let us say, Northern Indians, Vedic Indians. They call themselves Arya. For instance, the Persian King Darius in 519 BCE wrote in his Bestun inscription, "I'm the first to write in Arya," because other inscriptions are in Mesopotamian languages. So secondly, Arya is of course not a racial term, but a cultural one in the Veda, that is. And it is a linguistic term by which the linguists define Vedic Sanskrit, Old Persian, the Zoroastrian Avesta, and they are all Indo-Iranian languages. Interestingly, as a footnote, Arya is usually not used in the Veda to designate the Vedic language, the early form of Sanskrit, if you like. Only once in Aranyaka we get Arya Vak, the Aryan speech. Then another preliminary is dates and data. The major problem is, of course, the date of the early Arya texts, especially the Rig Veda. Secondly, the archaeology of Northwest India, let us say the Greater Punjab, after the end of the Indus or Harappan civilization around 1900, 1300 BCE, we have no no data for the Vedic texts in archaeology. So the Harappan civilization ended just before what we call the Indo-Aryan migration into northwestern India. Of course, India used in the traditional sense, including Pakistan, India, and so on. Now, if we combine textual data from the Rig Veda, etc., and linguistic data, more about that in a second, we can indicate the beginning of the Rig Vedic period around 1200 BCE. Nowadays, more detailed genetic data, especially ancient DNA, sustain these results. Here already you can see various sciences come together at the same location and date. So the data from the various sciences will now be presented, but always with cross-references to the other sciences and text, which indicate overlaps and even confirmations. Of course, each field has its own problems, and I cannot go much into that today because my talk is already too long, I'm afraid. So let us start with archaeology. By the way, if you have a question, you could perhaps ask the organizers for this PowerPoint and receive it from them. Now, first archaeology. So the Great Indus, or as we call it technically, the Harappan civilization from its heyday from 2600 to 1900 before the Common Era, and with some late Indus remnants until 1300 BCE. But that does not overlap, as you can see already, with the Vedic text. And so the Harappan civilization is definitely pre-Vedic, although that is disputed by many people, especially on the political right now. Now, the actual Vedic data, if we could find them in the Greater Punjab, they are rare because there are some 5 meters of sediments on top of this early period. So you have to dig deep and you have to find the place, which is a problem. Nowadays with modern technology, we can perhaps do so, but there are many more interesting areas, especially in westernmost Pakistan, eastern Afghanistan, and they are little explored and of course now mostly inaccessible. Then secondly, most North Indian, the post-Harappan, so to speak, Vedic excavations are badly reported. This is well known among the archaeologists. I don't need to go into detail, but mostly with old style pottery data, which gives you a relative chronology, but not correct dates. More recently, of course, we have others like the C14 methods or the use of tree rings, the dendrochronology, and so on. So we get a more accurate dating for whatever we find in archaeological excavations. Sorry. The problem is that of the late Harappan period, so that means up to 1300 BCE roughly, we have very little excavations, and mainly in the town of Harappa. So what we can see is that the style of pottery is maintained, but with some new designs and with a shift to cremation and subsequent urn burial. So this, interestingly, there is a motif of a little human being inside a bird, which may reflect the Vedic ideas that the ancestors fly around for 1 year in the form of birds. So there are some more, and I will cut it short. There are more excavations of graveyards, but unfortunately not with DNA, as we can see. So there are interesting burials and remains at Sinauli, that is just east of Delhi on the Yamuna River, allegedly, now we don't have clear dates, from 1800 or 2000 BCE. So that would mean the last stage of the Harappan civilization before the migration of Indo-Aryans into the Greater Punjab. So we don't get a good overlap between the Indus and the Vedic period, rather they are quite different from each other. Now I will give you one example of interpretation of such, sorry, what is going on, of such archaeological data. And that is because the people on the right, Hindu tribe people especially, they constantly contest such data. Interestingly, they proceed just in the manner of Christian fundamentalists. We have a good experience of that in the America here, by exploring disagreements between individual scholars. Of course, scholars always disagree with each other, but this is then taken to indicate that the subject would and could not provide reliable results. Instead, they always put forth alternative facts, another current US term, and imagined dates reaching back far into the early Bronze Age or even to the beginning of Kali Yuga and so on, some even earlier. So as an example of archaeological finds in the interpretation, I will discuss the question of horses and chariots. So horses are steppe animals. They are not, they don't occur in the desert areas. Yeah? There we get donkeys and onagers, or as we call them in India, half-asses. Yeah? So these are still remnant in Gujarat, in the run of Kutch actually. But horses are fairly late import into South Asia and also into the Near East, around 1900, 1700. And therefore in India too, early horse bones and figurines are attested from 1800 onwards. And that they can be due to pre-Indo-Aryan migration of people at that date. Similarly in Mesopotamia, actually. So if you read reports about Indus horses, you better take them with so many grains of salt, because skeletons of horses, half-asses, onagers, and donkeys can only be distinguished by their phalanges. That is, on our hand, you know, the various bones in our fingers. So when you have them, then you can see whether this skeleton is one of a horse or a donkey, etc. But we don't have good specimens yet in collections of data. Now, the earliest horse finds, as I mentioned just now, may not even belong to the speakers of Indo-Aryans. That is quite similar in Mesopotamia, where we have early horse finds among non-Indo-Iranian or Indo-Aryan people. Secondly, we must restate what a chariot actually is. Yeah? It was a lightweight, about 30 kilogram, horse-drawn vehicle with two spoked wheels and mounted by one or two riders, Sanskrit Rathin or Ratesta. So that is not the case in the recent finds of so-called chariots at Sinauli, as I mentioned, east of Delhi. These are carts with full wheels, with bronze ornaments, and probably drawn by bullock, like the massive Daimabad bronze race cart found in Maharashtra, I think. So let me see. Yeah, so this is a picture of the excavation. You can see here the full wheel, and in the reconstruction it is clearer. So this is not what we would call a chariot, but people use this term even for the Bhubaneswar large vehicle, you see, the Jagannath vehicle. So we should be very clear when we speak of chariots. They should rather look like, oh, sorry, this is a Daimabad bullock cart. You can see it's not drawn by horses, but by bullocks with full wheels. So I will not go into much detail now. The chariots seem to have been invented in the Ural area in eastern Russia. Both the Indo-Iranian terms, rata for chariot and driver, ratin, or ratarishta in Indo-Iranian, were invented in that area around 2000 BCE. And from there then imported into the Near East, Egypt, in the early to middle second millennium BC. And similar, of course, in India. Yeah, we find, as I mentioned, we don't find them before 1800 or so. So here we have a grave at Sintashta in the Ural area. You see, this is still a proto-chariot with a full wheel, while later on, the spoked wheel is invented. It is clearly visible here in the so-called Oxus treasure. Unfortunately, it has been in St. Petersburg for 200 years or so. We don't know exactly from where it comes, and of course not from which level. But you can see you have two people there, the driver and the passenger, so to speak. So, so much for the background and interpretation of certain features in archaeology. Now, when we look around for possible remnants of Indo-Aryans in India, we can look at the Gandhara grave culture, or the Iron Age, so a little later, the Iron Age excavation at Accra in Banu, that is westernmost Pakistan, around 1000 BCE. So this Iron Age, while the Rig Veda is still Bronze Age. But here we get stone fortresses like those of the chieftain Sambala in the Rig Veda, who, according to the Rig Veda, could not be overcome for 40 years with his 99, that means a lot of fortresses. So it is a good example of the overlap between text archaeology and linguistics, because the name Shambhala is not Indo-Aryan. Here is an overview of the Andronovo culture, to which Sintashta belongs in Kazakhstan, Eastern Russia, and so on, and which will return to the BMSC later on. That's the Bactria Magyana culture, and Swat here with the earliest Indo-Aryan genes, as we'll see. So we need much more archaeology, especially in areas that are not covered by these 5 meters of sediment. So in places which are higher above the ancient floodplain. That has not been done. But now penetrating satellite data and drones, of course, may help us to identify the shallow pastoral remnants of the of the Indo-Aryans who moved around in their territory from one grazing area to the next. I will not go into this scenario here of how people move from the Ural area to India. Usually we think across the rivers here in Central Asia, but there's also the mountain corridor with very good grazing pasture land. And actually this is still inhabited by the Kyrgyz today, all the way from Kyrgyzstan down to northern Kashmir. So let us come to linguistics then. And by that I mean comparative historical linguistics. This is again very much discussed now by revisionists, but they usually don't have any insight into the aims and methods. But still, usually, as you can see below, denounce this science as a colonial pseudoscience. Well, actually, this kind of linguistic comparison works very well in Africa or Polynesia or the Americas. So why not in India? Yeah? So, but people who attack comparative linguistics, of course, don't know anything about the other fields. Yeah? So as far as our Indo-European languages are concerned, you see here the Indo-Iranian languages in blue, from Kurdish to Assamese, and of course Sinhala in Sri Lanka as well. And I won't go into details here. Germanic language is in red and so on, Slavic language in green. And we should cut off here near the Urals because the rest is very late expansion of Russian. So we get a family tree like this here, with Indo-Iranian in the middle here, branching off into Iranian and, as they say here, Sanskrit. So comparative linguistics is a natural science as far as the sounds of the language are concerned. Yeah, they can be measured scientifically, both for their frequency and the position of where they are produced in the mouth or in the larynx, etc. Meanings is a more complicated thing, but my standard example is always English hound and dog, which corresponds exactly to German Hund and Dogge. But the German Hund is a dog and the German Dogge is a bloodhound. So exactly opposite. Huh? So we can, of course, deduce from this that these words mean some kind of dog, if we don't have other evidence. So apart from Indo-European, that means Indo-Aryan languages in India, we have, first I have to tell those who doubt the validity of historical and comparative linguistics, we actually have the proof of the pudding. For instance, two sounds, one in Hittite, ancient language of Turkey, and one in early pre-Homeric Greek, that is the sound laryngeal H2 and the Greek K. They have been reconstructed already in the 19th century, but they were actually discovered in writing only in the earliest 20th century, 1916 and 48, by the Czech scientist Hrozny and the British Ventris. So here you have the sounds represented in writing, which had been reconstructed 100 years earlier, but without any written evidence. So most North Indian languages, and Sinhala, of course, belong to this group of Indo-Iranian, or rather Indo-Aryan, and ultimately Indo-European languages. Similar reconstruction, of course, we find for Dravidian and for the Munda languages, Austroasiatic that is, and Tibeto-Burman as well in the Himalayas, Assam, and so on. So I will just briefly mention that there are certain remnant languages, even in the area where Indo-Aryan is spoken. For instance, Burushaski in the northernmost Pakistan on the Chinese border, Kusunda in the hills of Nepal, Nahali in central India, where about 25% of its vocabulary are neither Indo-Aryan nor Dravidian nor Munda, and they are the oldest Indian vocabulary, so to speak. And the Veda in Sri Lanka as well, and certainly whatever is left of the Andamanese languages in the Andaman Islands. So these are remnants of languages that are neither Indo-Aryan nor Dravidian nor Munda. There are many extinct languages, substrates, we would call them, with usually easily identifiable by unusual sounds, grammar, no Indo-Aryan, etc. etymology. For instance, one is the one in substrate in Hindi by Masika, a professor at Chicago, where he studied agricultural terms. But when I looked more closely at this, they're actually found from, let us say, northern Pakistan all the way to Marathi and so on. Unfortunately, this kind of study, substrate studies, is not found in India. Yeah? We don't have any investigations of what may lie below Hindi or Sindhi. And the same is true, of course, for Dravidian languages. Yeah, so one of my colleagues, actually Blazek, in the Czech Republic, he found an Australian residue in Tamil. As we have seen when we come to genetics, the native, the Aboriginal Australians, of course, came all the way from Africa via India to Australia. And apparently there's some residue of that found in Tamil, also in genetics, by the way. So we get a very long prehistory of Indian languages for some 60,000 years from the initial immigration from Africa. And we get many linguistic data sets, and we can certainly say with confidence that there never was a single or even dominant language of ancient South Asia, and also not for the area of the Indus or Harappan civilization. Here you get a map of some of these major and remnant languages. We can discuss in detail the migration path. Of course, I assume that the speakers of Indo-Aryan, so early Sanskrit, if you wish, have come from the steppes of Kazakhstan and Russia into the greater Punjab. Now, the Rig Veda itself is clearly a South Asian text. We can see that by the many river names mentioned, especially in the river hymn of Rig Veda 1075, for instance, the Sindhu for the Indus, the Krumu for the current Kollam river in Pakistan, the Gomati for the Gomal river in Pakistan, Vipash for the Bias, Yamuna for the current Jamna, and so on and so on. So clearly, this is an area from roughly Delhi or even the Ganga all the way into eastern Pakistan, eastern Afghanistan, with the Kabul River, etc. That is the Kubha in Sanskrit. And one of them is, of course, the Saraswati River, which I've not mentioned here, which is clearly located between the Yamuna and the Vipash, so in the eastern Punjab or Haryana. That is a note for those who, who doubt the existence of the river Saraswati, which is a very small rivulet nowadays. So for the spread southwards, we can see we have many types of evidence from the Bactrian area, the BMAC, and from the mountain belt and from the Hindu Kush, etc. The interesting point here, and I have to be very brief here, is that we get many Indo-Iranian or Indo-Aryan loanwords in various Uralic languages. That Uralic is Finnish, Hungarian, Estonian, and languages in northern Russia like Komi and so on. So these languages have absorbed quite a few words from even Indo-Iranian. So early on, from about 2000 BCE, for instance, we have the god Bhaga, which turns up as Pakas. So even with the nomenclature S, nowadays, of course, with Sarjanian. So Pakaha, Bhagaha, so turns out as the older form Bhagas, and in Uralic as Pakas, or Sata for 100. Interestingly, Orya in Finnish for an Aryan slave, so apparently some Indo-Aryans were caught by the Uralic people. Chakra with the old form of, with the K still in existence, as Kekra, and so on and so on. So there are many studies of Indo-Iranian loanwords and in the Uralic languages. Yeah. Why? Because the Indo-Iranian culture was more developed than those in the mountains of the Ural and beyond for the Uralic tribes. So after the Indo-Aryans left south, the remaining Iranians, Proto-Iranians, supplied a large amount of loanwords to the Uralic languages and even to Slavic. For instance, the Iranian Baga, that is from Sanskrit Bhaga, becomes Slavic Bogu for God. Yeah, you can still in Russian, you can still Bože moj, oh my God. Yeah? and nobody knows that this is Sanskrit Bhaga. And the river names like Don, Dnieper, Dniester, Danube, etc., all for a word like Danu for a river or the goddess of that. So one important point here is that we actually have early Indo-Aryan, not Iranian, not Indo-Iranian, but early Indo-Aryan, that means basically Vedic words in the Mitanni kingdom, which is a kingdom in northern Syria and northern Iraq from roughly 1600 onwards. And they have quite different types of words taken over into their non-Indo-European language. Horse colors. There's a horse training manual with terms for 1 turn, 2 turn, 3 turns, 5 turns, etc. Aika Vartana, Tri Vartana, and so on. The chariot fighters are called Maria with a nu suffix of the Mitanni language. There is a agreement between the Mitannis and their neighbors in Turkey, the Hittites, which mention at the end, the very end, 4 major Vedic gods in this order: Mitra, Varuna, Indra, and Nasatya, that means the Ashwin. And finally, there are many royal names, because when a king of the Mitannis assumed power, he took on an Indo-Aryan name. We sometimes know his original Mitanni name, but as a throne name, he took on an Indo-Aryan term. So they are attested even from Palestine all the way to eastern Iraq. So this is a picture of the Mitanni realm and their neighbor here, the Hittites. And by the way, in the southern Iraq, we have the Kassites, which also are non-Indo-European, but they have a lot of the same type of Indo-Aryan loanwords. Why do I mention this at great length? Because these words provide us a date for the Rig Veda. So here we have an overlap between linguistics and actually written text archaeology, if you like. We know that the Rig Veda is a late Bronze Age text before iron was introduced around 1000 BCE in the Punjab, earlier in some other parts of India. Now, when we look at the Indo-Aryan words in Mitanni documents, they're slightly older than the Rig Veda. For instance, in the word Mazda, which becomes Iranian Mazda, we have this combination of az, which turns into e in Sanskrit, in the Rig Veda, Medhira, and so on. So this is an older form written down in the Mitanni text, and so it must be several hundred years earlier than our Rig Veda. And the same is found in verb forms for the perfect, for instance, sede, he has sat down, etc., which would have been sazdai. Avesta still has hazde. And this this change from az to e, I mean, if you have a verb sad, why should be the perfect in e? Yeah, there's no reason. But here we can see, or mene, yeah? But here we can see that it comes from a sazdai. And this process of changing roots with middle a is still in progress in the Rig Veda. For instance, as I said, from man you get mene and so on. In some, the Rig Veda cannot be much older than 1400 BCE, and it may not be much older than 1200 BCE, because by 1400 you still had Sazdai or Mazda, but in the Rig Veda you have Med, yeah, and Sede, and so on. So it's a very good point where archaeology overlaps with the linguistic data. Therefore, some details here. Now, how the actual migration paths, for instance, for the Mitanni Indo-Aryans took place, that is up for discussion. The word for money, for jewel, may point to a migration from Tajikistan, the Tajikistan area. So Then from 13th century BCE, we get a transition to mountain cattle breeding and an increase in riding skills, which are sparsely attested. Mostly we get chariots, and about 5 times we get evidence for horse riding. So there's a book by the Russian scholar, the late Kuzmina, where you can find details about that. So again, there is the move to the Greater Punjab and Afghanistan by the speakers of early Iranian and Rigvedic. And as you can see, the Mitanni are way off in the west, in the Mesopotamian area. So as I mentioned, this mountain belt has very good pastures above 1,000 meters. And that is exactly the territory still occupied by the Kyrgyz people from Kyrgyzstan to Kashmir. And this is, we can locate some of this because in the Rig Veda, the mountain Mujavand is the mountain where we get the best soma. And in Avesta, so in the Zoroastrian text, we get the Muja person and the Muja land. It still can be found in modern topography, as I noticed some 10 or 15 years ago, to my surprise, because we still have the Muj Tar Atta mountain and the Muj Kol river. That is now in Kyrgyz, and the Muj is still there, but Tar is the mountain, Atta means father. So this in their language, it means the ice mountain father. But the Muj is still preserved from Rigvedic and Avestan times onward. So this is exactly the area where the Indo-Iranians, both the Iranians and the Vedic Indians, picked up the Soma drink. More about that later on. So there are a number of loanwords from the Bactria area, which Lubotsky in Holland has studied in 2003. And surprisingly, he lists names like Indra, Atharva, Gandharva, Sarva, and so on. Among these, the word for brick is very interesting, Ishti. In the Rig Veda, we don't get any bricks, but it is found all over Iranian and in the Dardic area and Burushaski as well. And interestingly, in Tocharian, that means westernmost China, yeah, the Xinjiang area. We find Ishti and Ishtika after the Rig Veda. So apart from such words, we get some influence from the ancient Near East. When agriculture, that means wheat agriculture, spread to the borders of India. The word for wheat is very strange in Sanskrit. It is godhuma, which means cow smoke. Why should anybody call a plant cow smoke? Well, it is an adaptation with a popular etymology into Sanskrit, because the East Iranian form is gantuma, and the Caucasus we get gomu and such words. So it's all from the Near Eastern word khand. Similarly, for donkey, where we get Avestan and Vedic words. There's some evidence also from the Hindu Kush area. For instance, the word for crystal, studied long ago by one of my teachers, Karl Hoffman, and that needs much more research, yeah, which words in the Hindu Kush area have entered into Indo-Aryan. I would especially like to point out the Nagas. They are well attested in the Afghan and northwestern Indian area, but usually connected with ice and snow. They reside in lakes, ponds, and rivers, and also in frozen lakes. This is not what an Indian Naga is like, you see, but they are shape-shifting, just like the Indian Nagas. So the main river of Afghanistan in that area is called Lunam, that means Deva Naga. So this is some idea of how it looks in that area. that is northwestern Pakistan, the Kalasha people who have a pseudo, a kind of Vedic religion until this day, so being surrounded by Muslims on all sides. And finally, there are a lot of loanwords, of course, from the northern Indus area, about 300 of them. The interesting point, they have been studied by my predecessor, Kuiper in Holland, at great length, last in his book of 1991, which is misnamed Aryans in the Rig Veda. The non-Aryans got lost in the phone transmission. So the book is called Aryans in the Rig Veda, while the book is about non-Aryans in the Rig Veda. Now, the interesting point here is that the oldest loans in the Rig Veda, before book 10, for example, are not from Dravidian or Proto-Dravidian. I call them Paramunda, which would be a long discussion because they share some Munda traits, but not all of them. So it is an unknown language with unusual sounds. For instance, retroflex sh after a and a, or which is just not done in Sanskrit, or an s found after e and u, again non-Indo-Aryan, and we can go on the particle iti and absolutives, gatva, etc. Samgam ya, which are not Dravidian, as my friend Kuiper thought, because they are also found in Burushaski and Munda. So it is a South Asian feature. So, and clearly an aerial feature. All languages which pass through this area of the Dardic Indo-Aryan language, like Kalasha, the Burushaski area in northern Pakistan, eastern Iranian, and Pashto in Afghanistan, and even on the northern side in Xinjiang, Saka, Kotani Saka, Iranian. So they all have developed this retroflex sound, ter, der, ner, sh, etc. Kalasha even has a retroflex u. Try to speak u with your tongue bent backwards. So this is clearly an aerial feature of the Northwest, let us say, and it has not been recognized. So it is accepted even by late immigrants like Baluchi from Turkey. The Western Baluchi don't have it. Eastern Baluchi on the Indian side have retroflexes, so you can acquire it. It is something probably very old, but I won't go there. The important point here about the type of loanwords in the Rig Veda and later Vedic texts is that they don't reflect the Indus or Harappan civilization. Why? Because the Indo-Aryans moved into that area only after the Indus period, the Indus civilization disintegrated. But some people, of course, remain in the Greater Punjab, and they are in close communication with the Indo-Aryans. So those words enter into Rig Vedic speech, especially agriculture, plants, some wild animals, terms for music and dance, not the great Harappan deities, but low-level spirits and demons. Those we find in the Rig Veda. So clearly some kind of communication was going on with the post-Harappan people and the Indo-Aryans. Of course, in Indo-Aryan, you have all the old Indo-European designations for horse, cattle, and so on. The interesting point is that even some of the local leadership is integrated, as we can see in the Rig Veda, for instance, the chieftain Bribhu or Balbhuta. I must add here that B is a very rare sound in Indo-European and also in early Indo-Aryan, of course. And so if you get chieftains called Bribhu, that is not an Indo-Aryan person, but he is a recognized chieftain among the Rig Vedic tribes. And similarly, interestingly, also for early poets, For instance, in the battle hymn, Rig Veda 7:18, you get the poet Kavasha with a sh after sound ah, which is not allowed in Indo-Aryan. It is after EU, etc., but not after ah. And the same is true for the retroflex N, Kanva, book 8 of the Rig Veda, where we have retroflex N after A again. So these two poets, they have typical non-Indo-Aryan names, which shows that some of the local population was integrated into Rigvedic society and even became Rigvedic poets. So all of that, of course, came to a certain halt with the codification of the 4 classes, Varna, not castes, but classes, in the late Rig Veda in 1090, in the Purusha Sukta, where we have Brahmana, Rajanya for Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. As I said, the high-level deities of the Harappan civilization don't appear, and most of the other typical traits of Harappan civilization don't appear in the Rig Veda, like trade and seals and so forth. So the Rigvedic loans were taken from the post-Harappan rural population which remained. So as I mentioned, some loan words in the late Rig Veda are from Dravidian, but not as most people think from Proto-Tamil, because those loan words start with d or g, etc., which is not a Tamil feature. Yeah? For the lizard, for example, you get gauli, not kauli, and so on. So this is similar to Kannada, or in this case, we should think perhaps about the predecessor of Kannada. But that is a term, point which has not been studied at all, actually. So I leave the question when Dravidians actually appeared in India. They must have come ultimately, of course, via Iran from Africa, but these are the ancestors of Dravidian speakers. Dravidian itself is, of course, a feature of the Mid-East and South Asia. And importantly, we can see about the Dravidian migration that place names are still found in Sindh and Maharashtra, way down to Middle Ages, which are clearly Dravidian and not Indo-Aryan. So we see the path of migration through Sindh and Maharashtra to what is now Dravidian territory in South India. Now, interestingly, we can study, for the southern Indus civilization, we could study the substrate in the Sindhi language. Then we would know what the major languages were from Sindh to Punjab, but that has not been done. We are now trying that at Harvard, and with interesting results, I can already say that some of the words are clearly pre-Indo-Aryan and go back to similar words in Masika's language. Interestingly, I should mention in passing at least, the name of the 4th class, the Shudra, they may go back to a Sindh substratum, because when Alexander and his scientists came to India in 326 BC, they noticed the Sudroi, or nowadays Greek Sudroi, people on the borders of Sindh and Punjab. So this may be one of the many cases where a tribal name was expanded to include other groups. Yeah? For instance, since I'm from Germany, Germani is just one tribe. At the time Caesar went to the River Rhine around 45, I think, BCE, and that has been expanded to all Germanic people like English and Scandinavian, etc. Another term is Mleta for barbaric tribes. It may also go back to the population of the lower Indus, because the Mesopotamians know of this area as Melucha and Pali Milaku. So how you get from Melucha to Mleta is, of course, a mystery. Mleta occurs, I think, for the first time in Shatapatha Brahmana. Now we come to the field of genetics. that is a fairly recent entry into our discussion about the historicity of the Vedic text. So far, this branch of population genetics was based on modern genetic features. So genetic features taken from the current populations of India, for example, both for the female mtDNA and the male Y chromosome, NRY. They gave us some kind of dates, but they have very broad error bars. Yeah? Like in archaeology before dendrochronology, etc., we get rough dates, but cannot really distinguish centuries, sometimes even millennia. So that was not very useful, although the data points from both parents helped a little bit. Yeah? So beyond the female and the male DNA. So this is the path of migration out of Africa via India. Unfortunately, below the ocean nowadays, because the sea was 100 meters lower in those early years, up to Australia, where modern humans appear in 50,000 BCE. But now we have a sort of revolution in genetic studies. Some 10 years ago, we could actually investigate ancient DNA taken from skeletons, and especially from the inner ear, which tell us which history the population in a certain area had in great detail. For instance, Europeans and East Asians, but not Africans, have 1 to 4% of Neanderthal DNA, yeah, which we never knew before. And there are many others in Central Asia and beyond Indonesia, which are other types of early humans, and they have interacted with our ancestors, so to speak. So this is a burgeoning field of studies, and it is very important for us as far as the Vedic civilization is concerned. So far, we did not have any ancient DNA from Indian, Pakistani, etc. skeletons. Yeah, only modern DNA. But the reason is, of course, that the monsoon climate hinders the preservation of DNA, so it decays fairly quickly. And if you are lucky, you could find it in the petrous bone in the inner ear. But even that had not been done. Yeah, so far we just did not have ancient DNA from India. By the way, there's a new study now of ancient DNA which we can trace in the soil of caves, etc. So that is a promising field. It is just a few months old. And so we know from normal DNA studies that there are two branches in India, the ancient North and the ancient South Indians, which does not mean Indo-Aryans and does not mean Dravidians, because this is much too early for that. So my colleagues in the Harvard Medical School, after a long discussion with them, they chose these terms just to avoid the confusions with Aryans and Dravidians. So we can study these DNA remnants in modern DNA. And I won't go into detail here. You can see that they come from various areas. For us, the male R1A is especially interesting because that is from Central Asia, important as we will see. So the expansion of this group R1A has occurred about, around 2000 BCE. And that coincides with the earliest entry of steppe people into South Asia, according to archaeology. But the case becomes even more interesting because now we have one skeleton from the Indus town of Rakigarhi on westernmost India, I mean, current India. And immediately the newspapers broadcasted that this skeleton has no Aryan, no steppe DNA. So there's no Aryan invasion, as they say. So it becomes a political term, and there were quite a number of newspaper articles which push that line. But now we have uh, a study by Vagesh Narasimhan, who was also at the Harvard Medical School, and he studied the earliest Central Asian DNA in India, that is in Swat, now in westernmost part of Pakistan. So you can find it, it has been published now, this is the early pre-publication. So the interesting point here is that some people entered into the Swat area, Sanskrit Vedic Suvastu, the good land, around 1250 BCE. That would be the first Indian ancient DNA, and interestingly from the steppe belt. And actually this is preserved in northern India among the Brahmins, especially up to 57%, or with the Kalasha up to 30%. So here for the first time we can see who entered India at what time and from where. This of course fits very nicely in time and space, linguistics and archaeology, the migration of Indo-Aryan speakers as we find them in the Rig Veda. So this is one of the several cases of overlap between various sciences for which we should always look to confirm our individual data. So I think this is so well established now with this SWAT evidence that we can be sure that this migration happened at this time. And whatever is said about no Indo-Aryan migration or invasion to South Asia is just contradicted by such evidence. And of course, there is no migration from, as some nationalists say, from India to the West, yes, all the way to Europe. Yeah. So some people say the Drukyu in the Rig Veda are a European tribe nowadays. Well, luckily not, because Druk is of course from Tuchit. Now, so the ancient DNA is a quickly expanding field now, and we can correlate it very nicely with other fields like linguistics and archaeology. Now, a little bit about Rig Vedic religion, myth, and ritual, and I have to be short here, not to talk for too long. Of course, religion and ritual can be adopted very quickly, as you can see in any migrant population, for instance, here in America. But rituals can also be very archaic and change very little. For instance, as I mentioned, the Agni Chayana, which we witnessed in 2011 in Kerala, they go back some 3,000 years and based on Vedic texts are still being performed in the same fashion. Yeah. So there are films about that by Fritz Stahl from 1975 onwards. Yeah, if we compare the Rig Vedic Indo-Aryan text with the Harappan civilization, the Indus civilization, you can see that there is no continuation. Yeah. The great deities of the Indus are not found in the Vedic text, only some low-level deities and spirits, demons, Shishnadeva, etc. But many words like Chimedian and so on, they are isolated linguistically and belong to the substrate. They are not Indo-Aryan. And the link of the Harappan civilization with later Hinduism, thousands of years and sometimes thousands of kilometers distant, is of course a fantasy, especially propagated by our colleague Parpola. So for instance, the famous Shiva Pashupati seal, I think I have it here, yeah, this one. It does not reflect the later Shiva, but it is a very widespread Stone Age Northern Eurasian deity, the Lord of the Animals, which is found, for example, on a vessel in Western Denmark, in Gundestrup. You can see it here, at least to some extent. So figure surrounded by three animals with their heads in one direction, one animal the other direction. And the animals have changed a little bit in Europe. You see, you don't get the tiger and so on. And the person here, Kernunos, as we call him in Celtic, has trousers, which you don't need in the Indus here. So the same for Mahisha Asura, Mahishasura killing. The Indus seal has it like this here, while usually the Asura is killed from the back in the later Indian civilization. And I like this one. The Namaste gesture is found already in Bactria Magyarna around 2000 BCE. So it is not a Vedic invention, it is earlier than that. And to my great surprise, I found it in Japan as well, around 1000 BCE. So this is something, again, which is quite old and not necessarily Indian. So as far as the deities are concerned, the Veda has, of course, many remnants of Indo-European religion and ritual: Father Heaven, Mother Earth, the daughter of heaven, Ushas, the sons of heaven, the Ashwins, and so on, and especially the fire worship, Agni, Latin Ignis, etc. Also, one of the major deities, that is Indra, and his function as dragon slaying, which we find in many Indo-European cultures, Greek and Iranian and so forth, is also found in Nuristan, so easternmost Afghanistan, and with the Kalasha people in westernmost Pakistan. He still is called Indra there. Yeah? Ancestor worship is another item. You always worship, you always offer for your three ancestors. So therefore, Greek Trito, Patois, the three ancestors. And many of the domestic rituals or Grisha rituals you can find here and there in the Indo-European areas, but they are well collected in the Grisha Sutra text in India. A different story refers to the sacred drink. In the Indo-European culture, it was fermented honey, English mead, or Sanskrit madhu, and that is the drink of immortality, Greek ambrosia, which means amrita. So this is something which is not transmitted into the Iranian and Vedic religion. Instead, we have the sacred drink soma, a Western homa, from the word su, to press out. It is most probably the plant ephedra, which you get in many cold medicines, ephedra sinica, etc. And in both the Rig Vedic tradition and the Greek tradition, this is brought by an eagle from the high mountain, as we will see. So, of course, mead and ambrosia are sweet, but the soma is rather bitter, but it is still called sweet in the Rig Veda. So you have to add milk, etc., to make it drinkable. So they have a very elaborate ritual around the soma ritual, both on the Iranian side and the Indian side. And it's, of course, still performed, as we have seen in Kerala, or you can see every year in Kerala, and by the Zoroastrians of Yazd Kerman in Iran, and of course the Parsis in Mumbai. So they still have the soma ritual, although it has changed to metal implements. And many of the soma ritual terms are again non-Indo-Aryan, Chamu, Chamrish, etc. Now, we can locate the origin. Here is the Kerala ritual, with the soma offerings. That is 2011 in this case. Now, this is the Central Asian innovation. We have one word for soma is Anshu, Sanskrit Anshu, a Western Anshu, Tokaran Ensuram, Tokaran again in westernmost China, and even in Chinese. So the best soma comes from the mountain Mujavand. It is called Maujavata in the Rig Veda. This is a clear, striking mountain of some 500 meters in westernmost China in Xinjiang. And as I mentioned earlier, it is still called Muj. The Avesta has a Muja land. It's clearly on the borders of Iran and India, because the local person mentioned from the Muja land is called Dashta Arni. But Agni is not an Iranian term, it is substituted by the Zoroastrian term Atar. So here we have a borderland of India and Iran, and as I mentioned, it is still to be found with the Muj mountain in Xinjiang and Kashmir. So these items, non-Indo-European items, were brought into India by the migrant Indo-Aryans. So this is the Muj Tar Atta in Xinjiang from the new Karakoram highway from Pakistan into Xinjiang. You can actually go there. Try to find the Soma on this mountain. Then, to be brief, there are certain survivals of Indo-European institutions, like the three classes, priests, nobility, and the people, Vish, Vaishya. But in India and also with the Greeks, the fourth class was added, the Shudra, or Pan-Hellenes in essence. Another important item is the Young Men's Association, the sodality. So teenagers had to prove themselves either by territorial expansion. The north term we use landnama, the taking of land, and by some rituals, including in Greece, the killing of a helot, so a low-class person. So these young men are dressed up like wolves. There we get the werewolf motif, and they're playing a dice game with dog knuckles in Greek and Latin. And this has actually recently been discovered in a Russian excavation where this was done with parts of dog skulls. So these people are called vratyas in Sanskrit. They occur in the prose text of Atharvaveda, book 15. They have always been misunderstood to this very day, but if you want to read about it, you can read a book by Falk, 1986, where he clearly shows that these young men, they are basically Vedas students on spring leave. And just like our students, they go to interesting places and behave obnoxiously. So also here, the Vratyas, they put pressure on their neighbors, and they have to give them cows for their start capital when they marry. So they play a dice game, a famous dice game, which you can find down to the Mahabharata, but not with cubes, but with 150 nuts. And you must grab an undefined number, and the remnants must be divisible by 4. Then it is auspicious. You say Kruta, Dam, from where you get Kruta, Yuga, etc. You can read all about that in Falk, 1986, unfortunately in German, but you can find some summaries in English as well. So the Kali Graha is, of course, the worst one, from where we get the Kali Yuga. So as I mentioned, some archaeological equivalent of these games has been found in Krasnosamarskoye, that is west of the Urals, near the Urals and the Volga River, for a winter ritual of young men. And so again, here archaeology, linguistics, and genetics overlap very nicely. This Krasnosamarskoye is found here, so west of the Urals, east of the Volga River, excavated over 20 odd years. The yellow here is the Indo-Iranian culture, let us call it like this. Let us leave it at that. So in the Hindu Kush, we get some adopted deities. Actually, the Gandharva is a typical BMAC suffix Riva, as in Atharva, etc. And some fairies, which we call Peri nowadays. they inhabit the high mountain pasture and interact with the with the herders who go up to the mountains in the summer period. And as I said, even the ancient local god Indra, appears as a horse riding New Year visitor, even nowadays with the Kalasha people. You can find a nice summary in Wikipedia. So, and finally the Nagas, yeah, as I mentioned, they bring ice and snow, about which the Kashmir history complains. When they had the upper hand, they were angry and brought ice and snow. So there, now what kind of Naga is intended here? You can see, sorry, you can see this excavated, one-eyed, scaled monster carrying a water mug that has been interpreted by the French archaeologist Frank Four in 1994 as the demon of the drought. Yeah? So when the water is caught up in ice and snow, and there is no rain, of course. That is interpretation, obviously. And this demon is fought by the eagle-headed hero. You can see the human being with eagle head and eagle feet, fighting various demons like the tiger in this case. So this is quite different from the Indian Nagas. This is a very early Naga representation from Shrunk near Mathura. So a human being with a hood of snakes. So these myths, they have been spread fairly widely.
Hello.
For Indra's, sorry, Indra's killing the dragon or great snake is reflected in Europe and far away via the steppes, even in old Japanese myths, but I can't go into details. The same for the horse sacrifice, found in ancient Rome, Ireland, and all along the steppe belt up to northern China and ancient Japan. So these are ancient Indo-European rituals which are preserved in the Rig Veda. So since I'm well over time, I suppose I will not go into much detail here to sum it up. So the Indian data that we have many overlaps in archaeology, genetics, linguistics, and of course the Vedic text. So which shows obviously the historicity of Vedic text. These are things in the Veda that actually existed, as we can see in the other sciences. So this sustains an emergent picture of the historicity and the origin and spread of the area, their language, poetry, religion, ritual, culture, and even their genetic setup. I have some more details here, but these are summaries of what we have discussed, so I won't go there now in the interest of time. The sum is that India was not isolated in history, prehistory, nor did the many facets which we have discussed of archaeology, linguistic, text, genetic data arise on their own inside the Indian subcontinent. So these are, most of them are not originally Indian. The original Indian data exists separately from those that we have discussed nowadays. So we can look to some 60,000 years of out of Africa history and the early influx into India and then beyond to Southeast Asia, etc. So in some, like other, people usually don't speak like this, like other Asian subcontinents, that is Europe, the once dry Southeast Asian, Indonesia, etc., and Northeast Asia, like those, the Indian subcontinent presents a fascinating array of internal developments and external influences that only patient and unbiased study can reveal. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Witzel. It was such an enlightening lecture with a PowerPoint presentation. we have started with an analysis of the historicity of the Vedas, which neither the traditionalists who say that Apurshaya Veda or the left or the right would try to agree with. But how beautifully you have approached this subject in an interdisciplinary manner from the archaeological point of view, the linguistic point of view, the genetics and the religion, mythology and the ritual. And you have rightly pointed out, sir, how beautifully this term Aryan is used in the cultural sense and not in the racial sense. How the Persian king Darius used it in 519 BCE. And in the Kaushitiki Aranyaka itself, Arya Vak is used only once there. And even that Harappan motif of a human inside a bird could represent the ancestors who roam around in the ether for 1 year after their departure. That is a very new approach. We have never heard of such a situation. And even the concept of Ratha or the constituents of the Ratha chariot itself, whether it is horse drawn or as in the Sinali chariot, it is bullock cart. And in the linguistics study, how some of the substrate or neglected languages like Kusunda in Nepal or even Nahali in central India, they would throw more light on this theory of the Indo-Aryan migration path and how beautifully you have traced the words in the migration path of Michani, where the money is used for jewel, and Mujavant, where the Soma is obtained as in the Avesta, the Muza, and how Alexander refers to the Sudroi people on the border of the Sindh and Punjab, corresponding to the Shudra, the term in our Vedic this one. And then the religion also, you have very beautifully pointed out the Lithuanian usage of Ashwinai for the Ashwinau, the twin gods in the Vedic literature, and how Soma here corresponds to the Avestan Homa. So it is not just confined to India, it is in a way, Aryavarta is more widely spread and it goes back to even 60,000 years out of Africa. That's very rightly you have said, sir. It is a highly enlightening lecture by you, Professor Witzel, and we are very much benefited by that, and we are very much beholden to you. We would like to express our sense of gratitude and thanks to you for taking so much of time and delivering this special lecture, the guest of honor. And on behalf of the Kantalu Shala, I wish to profusely thank you for your excellent lecture. I'm sure there'll be more questions also and clarifications, but for the constraints of time, maybe we can interact later. Dr. Murli Madhavan. Fine, thank you. Then we have, thank you, Professor Witzel. Now, I invite Professor Shashi Tiwari to give her keynote paper on the origin of environmental science from the Vedas. Professor Shashi Tiwari, she is a gold medalist from the Lucknow University. She is the chairperson of the World Association of Vedic Studies in Delhi. She was earlier working in the Maitreyi College as Professor of Sanskrit, Delhi University for nearly 4 decades. She is a visiting professor at the Hindu University of America in Orlando. She has given lectures in many universities in USA, Italy, Nepal, South Korea, and Canada. She was given the award of the Maharshi Vyasa Samman in 2014, and the certificate of honor from the President of India was given to her in the year 2015. She has published nearly 34 books, many of them on the Vedic studies, and we are very fortunate to have her here to deliver the keynote paper on the origin of environmental science from the Vedas. Now I request Professor Shashi Tiwari ji to present your paper. Professor Shashi Tiwari.
My voice is okay? It sound okay?
Yes, we can hear. Yeah.
ओम सहनावतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्वी नावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै. Namaskar to all of you present here, distinguished guest speakers and participants, and honorable president of this session. Firstly, I would like to congratulate Kantalur Shala University for organizing such a important, meaningful conference on a very relevant theme. And the theme is the ancient knowledge systems and their roots, etc. So we are going to discuss this. And my paper, as has been told here, is based on the origin of environmental sciences from Vedas. I would like to share my screen. Is it okay?
It is fine, madam. It's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is the topic, and I will take my time maybe of 35 minutes, not more than that. As an introduction, I have given some points about the antiquity and importance of Vedic literature. And my whole emphasis is on this, that Vedas are the source of all knowledge, all sciences. Every discipline we can find in the Vedas, but we have to find out the true meaning of the hymns and the verses and the mantras there. And what is the problem to get the real meaning and the correct meaning? The main point is that language of Vedas is symbolic language. We have to decode these symbols to get the real meaning and the essence of the mantras. So only then we can understand them. The approach of Vedic seers is truly comprehensive. They do not visualize in parts. They do not elaborate subject as is done in current education. But at the same time, grandeur and brevity of the Vedas are not found in the disciplines of modern sciences. The Vedas and discipline of modern sciences are rather complementary, not contradictory. A student of science may search the earliest of the ideas of any discipline in the Vedic literature. In recent days, environmental sciences, which is also called ecology, are disciplines of modern science under which study of environment and its constituents is done with minute details. As science, they are established in 20th century, but their origin can be seen long back in the Vedic and ancient Sanskrit literature. The Environment Protection Act, which was released in 1986, defines the environment as follows. Environment includes water, air, land, and interrelationship which exist among and between water, air, and land and human beings, other living creatures, plants, microorganisms, and property. So it means that all natural elements are the subject of environmental sciences, including its effect and relation with human beings and other living creatures. They may be micro or micro. That is no issue. So all nature and human life is the subject of environmental sciences. Mainly it consists of two components, namely biotic living organism and abiotic non-living material. The living organism can be grouped into three types: those living mainly on land, in water, and in air. The non-living material of the environment are land, air, water, property, etc. So what is the Vedic approach of environmental sciences? In Atharvaveda, we find a mantra where it is said that Trini Chandansi Kavyaha Vimeride. Rishis have talked about the three Chandansi, three coverings, three surroundings. And Paryavaran is the term used in Sanskrit for environment. So what is Paryavaran? Which surrounds us, our surroundings, which encircles us. And in Atharvaveda, we found equivalent words used there as avritaha, parivritaha, avritaha, vritaha, etc. And chandas is the main term which I have quoted here. And under Trini Chandasi, generally Bhashikaras have taken water, air, and plants or earth. And because they are so important for human beings, divinity to the nature is assigned. Divinity to the nature means to the natural form, all the activities, phenomena are realized as deities, and they are described with prayers, and all their attributes, their activities, their actions are described there. So they are just what those natural forces are described. It is very important, and that is, we can say that nature sciences, natural sciences were not far away from our Vedic seers. They were actually knowing each and everything about the natural forces of our surroundings. And for that, there should be no chaos. That's why they have visualized a cosmic order, which is called Rit. Rit is a very important concept of Vedas, and Rit is the concept which is actually controlling the whole thing, and which has to be followed by all human beings, by all natural elements, by all creatures. Who will control this Rit? Who will observe this Rit? So Varun is its lord, and all we know that Varun has the power to see the actions of the human beings, also of other creatures, and he can punish them, he can give them dand, etc. So pashas are there, and these uh, imagination is done for that. So Varun is regarded as a controller of Rit Tattva. And Rit Tattva is there to control the all cosmic forces or natural forces. Actually, Aryans were children of nature. They felt the greatness of natural forces. They worshipped and prayed them due to regard, surprise, and fear, and then attributed divinity to them. So Devata is the term used there for deities, and Devata is the concept which can denote, which is powerful, which is divine. In these things, we find prayers for certain natural elements such as air, water, earth, sun, rain, dawn, etc. Sorry for the interruption. So characteristic of these forces described in the verses prove that Vedic seers were masters of natural sciences. They have assigned division to the universe. This is very important, and our earlier speakers were also highlighting this point. They never talk in parts. They talk also about the whole cosmos, about the whole Brahmand, about the whole universe. And for the they have well measured that universe. And then finally they divided it into three regions: Prithvi, Antariksha, Yav. So this concept is very great according to me. And then deities are assigned there, divided there. So what are these reasons? as we know, Prithvi is broad reason, where we live, where we die, where we walk, where we sleep. And this Prithvi is called observer's space because we observe on it. And then the second is Antariksha, that is aerial space, intermediary space. And then comes Deus, and Deus is the light space where light pertains. And these three reasons are again the abode of different deities. But according to Yasta, as we all know, Agni is in earth, Vayu is Indra, Vayu or Indra is atmosphere, and Sun in heaven is the highest deity, and all other deities or their actions come under these deities. So all this is well known, but my point here is to highlight that this this way they have studied the whole nature, the whole cosmos, and their factors, their localities, their features, their powers, and everything. So various names are given to each of these deities, and attributes, actions are defined by that. Now I will only take 8 points in under this environmental sciences study in the Vedas. First is Earth, Prithvi. And here again I will quote our earlier speaker, respectable speaker, who was talking about Deva Prithvi. So Deva Prithvi connection he has shown very well. Deva and Prithvi. One is Pita, the Prithvi is Mata. So both have they are so powerful, they protect us, and the whole nature and the human beings and the creatures are living between them. Then Bhumi Sukti is there in the Atharvaveda, which has 63 mantras, and that also talk about the whole detail of the Bhumi Prathviyam, Putroham Prativya, Mata Bhumi Putroham Prativya. So in short, Vedic environmental consciousness is seen in the Bhumi Sutta. They were very much conscious about the element Prithvi, which is related from the environment. So that Prithvi is responsible for our food, our prosperity, our living, our nourishment. That holds Agni, and it shows that she has the power of geothermal field. She holds Indra. It means she has the power of geometrical field, and she generates energies from its body. Kanva Urja Samvire. So Urja is inside her. There are so many energies are there inside Prithvi. On the upper part, on the liver part, Sun is described as a heart of Prithvi. So all these details show the very knowledge of our seers, our ancient seers about science, about natural sciences, and especially about Prithvi. The second is Apaha, water. Water is essential to all forms of life. According to Rigveda, water is a part of human environment, occurs in 5 forms: rainwater, Divyaha, natural spring, Shravanti, wells and canyons, Khanitrinam, Lekas, Swamjaha, rivers, Samudrartha. So meaning is clear from the Sanskrit. What are the differences between all these? And these are 5 types mentioned in the Rig Veda. And then Indra, when we read about Indra, we know Vritraha, he is called Vritraha because his main characteristic is that he kills Vritra. What was the wrong deed of Vritra? Why he was killed? What was his fault? So because he was holding water. This was his fault. And this is very natural phenomena which is described again and again in the suttas, and Yasta and other commentators have approved this meaning. So this shows that the flow of water should not be stopped, and it is desired by humanity. Why? Because water is Amrit, water is pure, water is source of water. There are so many attributes, Visheshanas, there, Apaha Vishwa Veshji, etc. Apaha Amritaha. So like that, so everyone knows that without water we can't live, and that is all very much described in our mantra. The third is Vayu, air, concept of air. And this is the principal deity of Antariksha Vayu. It is in the observer's space, which is Prithvi, is called the abode of material particles. Light space is called the abode of energy. But this intermediate space, which is the place of Antariksha Vayu, the Vayu deity is there, is the form of energy. So again, Vayu is a type of energy which penetrates brightness also. It says the Yajurveda. Air is in the atmosphere. It has medicinal value. Everyone knows during this corona disease, we all know the importance of air, oxygen. So bio is very, very important, and it has medicinal qualities, medicinal values also. So it should be not polluted. All these are mentioned again and again in the mantras. And when we go to Upanishads, then there are 5 types of Vayu are described inside our body. And there are 3 Upanishads as here can be quoted: Pran, Vyan, Apan, Udan, Saman, etc. So inside our body also this Pran is working, this air is working. So simply we can understand that Vayu is not only general air, but it is life breath. It is a medicinal component which is required for our living, and that's why it should not be polluted. So whenever we study in modern times environmental sciences, we talk about pradushan. It should not be polluted. It should not be pradushan. So Vayu pradushan is prohibited in Vedas also. Water pollution is prohibited. Then Prithvi, the first component which we were discussing, is also said that should not be polluted. So like fourth is Akash, and it is concept of ether. So ether has relation with sound, and then in modern environmental sciences we talk about sound pollution. So sound wave moves at various frequencies, and Vedas says that there are 2 types of ether. One is inside body, hridaya ki seat hai, or the second is described as outside the body, which is again Akash. So Akash is Antah Akash, Bahya Akash. And Yajurveda says, do not destroy anything of the sky, do not pollute the sky, do not destroy anything of the antariksh. So it means indirectly, it talks about the production of ether, Akash. Then I will take fifth concept as mind, manas. Vedic prayers are, there are so many Vedic prayers, and the important one is known by each and every one of Shiv Sankalpa Sukta of Yajurveda. So it talks about the mind. Tanme mana Shiv Sankalpamastu. Me mana Shiv Sankalpamastu. So Shiv Sankalp is required for a healthy mind, for a peaceful mind, and bad thoughts and bad thinking should be prohibited. So it is described as a component, as a substance in Tarka Sangraha also, where 9 dravyas are described and manas is there. So why manas is taken into environmental sciences? Because it talks about the cultural environment of our whole existence. If man is all the time with us, so it should not be polluted again. It is very important. Like other things, it should also be very clear, very pure. And this is emphasized again and again in so many verses, so many mantras, and that is mentioned here as a concept. Then I have taken the next point of our surroundings, that is animal and birds. So interestingly, Vedic seers never leave anything of our surroundings. So all the time animals are very important part of our surroundings. Birds are very important. Nowadays, birds are very loud, etc. So we in Purusha Sukta we find the mantra Vayabhyam Aranya Ramya Sri. Three types of animals are there. Animals like birds who are live in the air, who can go in the air. Animals, forest animals, Aranya Pashu, and Gramya Pashu who can live in the gram, in the village, village animals. So these three types, and you will be surprised that today also in India generally we see animal and birds are described like that. In broad sense, we describe it the same way. So Rudra is there, Bhushan is there. There are so many deities to show them, protect them, pushti ke liye, for their post, for their well-being. So they have not left anything of our surroundings without taking their care. And horses and cows are very important among all main cattle. And Purusha Sukta has shown there how they were produced, how they were created from Tasmat Devya Sarvbhuta. So all these things we should remember when we are talking about environmental sciences. Animals should be safe, protected, and healthy. And you may remember here also that Dvipade Chatushpade, there are all the time they talk about two-leg human beings and four-leg animals. So they never care only men well-being, but the well-being of all creatures is their objective. And next is Aushadhi, plant and herb. Aushadhi means plants or trees or any herb, etc. They are in all our surroundings. They are very important part of nature and very important for livelihood of human beings. And Aranyani Sukta is there. Aranyani is the deity. She is the queen, and that she is described very important for all of us. Then Aushadhi Sukta is in the Rig Veda, and you may know that Rig Veda is called the Upaveda. Its Upaveda is Ayurveda. Generally, we say Upaveda of Atharveda is Ayurveda, but one opinion is that Rig Veda is the Upaveda of Ayurveda is the Upaveda of Rig Veda, and the main cause is Aushadhi Sukta. So, firstly, it is described there. Aushadhis are herbs are described there. They are addressed, and especially in one mantra, Sahasra, your Dhamani, Sahasra Dhamani, etc. is said there. You have hundreds of birthplaces, thousands are your shoots. So this detailed description of Aushadhis are there. And this has to be highlighted when we are talking about these herbal environmental sciences. In the Rig Veda, especially 1/4 of the Rig Veda is called Atharveda is called Ayurveda sciences, and Aushadhis and diseases and medicines are described there, and they are the main source of Ayurveda development. Then I have taken another point, and that is very important concept of Vedic seers, and that is concept of sacrifice yajna. Sacrifice yajna is regarded as an important concept of Vedic philosophy and religion. But when we study its broader sense, it seems to be a part of Vedic environmental sciences. Yajurveda and Rigveda describe it as the navel of the whole world. Prathibhyaha Nabhi. Yagyavai Prathibhyaha Nabhi. So Nabi is the source of nourishment for a child. Just as Nabi is important for a child for the nourishment, Like that, yajna is important for our nourishment, for the nourishment of environment, according to the Vedic concept. And you will be knowing this point also, that about yajna, descriptions have started from the Rig Veda only. From the Rig Veda, there are so many references of yajna. And Purusha Sukta is its main example. Yajna, yajyam, yajena deva, yajyanta deva, yajya, tani dharmani, pratmani asan. So sarvbhuta yajna. So yajna is a concept. The hymn is talking about creation, but that concept, that allegorically yajna is defined there. What is the three components which are making this theory of yajna? That are dravya, devta, and dan. Material, deity, and giving. If some material is given to a deity with devotion, that is yajna. And in lieu of that, as a fruit of that karma, that yajna, devta will give something which is desired by that devotee. So this is yajna in short. And this yajna is very important for keeping maintenance, for production also, and for maintenance also. Yoga and Shem, which is desirous of the whole environment. So if yajna is related with environment, then you can you have about this mantras are there in the Upanishads also, that when some material is offered to a deity with adoration, then it becomes yajna. Pleasing deity returns desired material in some different form to the devotee. This yajna is going on in the universe since beginning of the creation, and almost everywhere for production and for keeping maintenance, this is desired. Even the creation of universe is explained as yajna. Thus, the concept of yajna seems to be a major principle of ancient environmental sciences. In environment, all elements are interrelated and affect each other. Sun is drawing water from ocean to rays. Earth gets rain from sky and grows plants. Plants produce food for living beings. The whole process of nature is nothing but a sort of yajna. This is essential for maintenance of environmental elements. So this was the concept, and the next concept, which is interrelated with all these components which are part of environment, is coordination. Coordination between all natural powers. They are described in isolation. They may be described in isolation, but they are interrelated, as I have just seen in this the lines which I was just reading here. So this coordination or concord or harmony is required, and its best example is Yajurveda's Shanti Mantra, Dev Shanti, Antriksham Shanti, Prithvi Shanti, Apa Shanti, or Shatya Shanti. So everything should be in peace, everything. And you see, sky, peace of the sky, peace of the mid-region, peace of the earth, peace of the water, peace of the plants, trees, all gods, Brahma, universe, peace of peace. May this peace come to me. So all are interrelated also. This has been elaborated in Shanti mantras. And then finally, I am talking about my conclusion from the above detailed discussion. Some light is thrown on the awareness of our ancient seers about the environment and its constituents. It is clear that Vedic vision to live in harmony with environment was not merely physical, but was far wider and much comprehensive. The Vedic people desire to live a life of 100 years, and this wish can be fulfilled only when environment will be unpolluted, clean, and peaceful. Knowledge of Vedic sciences is meant to save the human beings from falling into any utter darkness of ignorance. Essence of the environmental studies in the Vedas is shown in the Ishavashopanishad first mantra. Ishavashyam idam sarvam yat kinchit jagatyam jagat Environment belongs to all living beings, so it needs protection by all for the welfare of the all. Thus, the study proves that the origin of environmental sciences is from the Vedas, and the term environmental sciences or ecology is the latest term used, and that is of 20th century. But our Vedic seers have talked it in the very first. I don't want to say text because it is revealed, as has been discussed already in the very by the president. So environmental studies are from the Vedas. It can be said very well. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Shashi Tiwari ji. You have very beautifully presented how this environmental studies can be traced to the Vedic literature, where the universal parents as Gyava Prithvi, concept of father and mother, the earth and the heaven. Very beautifully you have started with that, and how Niruktakara speaks about the three layers and the respective deities, Agni and Prithvi and Vayu and Antariksha and Surya and Jauhu. And you have very beautifully traced the concept of the Panchabhuta, Prithvi, Tejo, Vayu, Akasha, and how Prithvi, which is the only planet in which we inhabit, how this Prithvi Sukta is dedicated for the Prithvi itself, and up the water, because everything Apovaitikam Sarvam Vishwa Bhodanyavaha, everything is water only, and Vayu, not only outside but inside also, because the outside pollution has to be stopped at any cost, and it is the Prana Vayu which sustains us, the Pancha Prana concept you very beautifully spoke about, and that's why the Vedic mantras say Madhuvata Ratayate Madhukshanti Sintavaha. This nectar like breeze should flow for the welfare of the human beings. And coming to Akasha, and further on, very beautifully you pointed out how Manas is very important. That's why Shiva Sankalpa Sukta, the mental, the mind should not be polluted at any cost. Its purity has to be maintained. And it is for this reason that it is included as one of the 9 Dravyas in Tarka Sangraha, Prithivya, Tejo, Vayu, Akasha, Kala, Diga, Atma, Manamsi, Avayava. So very beautifully you pointed out to that. And how the Vedic prayer has been for the welfare of not only the human beings, but also for the 4 feet or the quadruped animals. Shanno astu divade sham chatushpate. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. And how the Vedas have devoted exclusive sukta like Aranyani Sukta or the Aushadhi Sukta in the Rig Veda, which speak volumes about the environmental awareness that was available in the Vedic literature, and which we will have to imbibe in the present day society now that we are confronted with so many pollutants by industrialization and deforestation and many such developments. As the Subhashita says, Vanena Rakshito Vyagraha, Vanam Vyagrena Rakshitam. The forest saves the tiger, and the tiger saves the forest. The man is the only intruder who is a danger for both. Without these two, man cannot survive. So environmental awareness is very important. You have very beautifully traced this to the Vedic origin. And thank you so much. On behalf of the Kantalu Shala, we record our sincere thanks to you, Professor Shashi Tiwari ji, for your excellent paper, supported by the PowerPoint. Thank you so much. And next we pass on to the citation. I now request Sri Narayanan Poti, the president of the Kantalur Shala, to read the citation to Professor Sannidhanam Sudarshan Sharma ji. Narayan Poti.
Thank you, sir. With great honor and respect, Kandalur Shala highly commends Professor Sannidhanam Sudarshana Sharma for the outstanding contribution and exemplary work in Vedic literature as a teacher, guide, and philosopher. Professor Sannidhanam Sudarshan Sharma, born for parents of Sharadamba and Lakshmi Narayana Murthy, aged 64 years, and he has experience as an educationist in different capacities, of which he has 12 years teaching experience as lecturer, 9 years as reader, and 21 years experience in working as RS Vidyabhita Tirupati, and also as professor and research experience he is having for many years. He had studied traditionally Krishna Yajurveda Bhashya, Mimamsa at his father, study of Shukla Yajurveda at Sri Ganesha Ganabhadi, Purva Mimamsa at V.K. Dongre Shastriji, University Education, and MA Sanskrit. He was the university first, and Acharya MA, Veda first in university, PhD Veda, and has successfully guided through MPhil, and he is having 2 PhDs. And he had several publications in his name. He authored 4 books and 28 research articles. He had worked in the capacities as the head of the department and dean of faculty, and worked for 4 years as vice chancellor and vice chairman, direct vice chairman, and director IQAC for 7 years. He has several years administrative experience, 8 years in Sri Venkateshwara Vedic University, Tirupati, and 5 years as MSR VP, Ministry of HRD. Presently, he is working as the Vice Chancellor of Sri Venkateshwara Vedic University, Tirupati, and had attended seminars, conferences, national 33 in number, international 11, countries visited: USA, University of California, Los Angeles, and Berkeley, Texas University, Austin and Florida, and University of Orlando. He earned the following distinction from the Japan, Tokyo University, and Retaka University, and the title of Veda Ratnam from Kanchi Kamakodi Pidham, title of Veda Nidhi from Waves Organization, Hindu University of America, Orlando, USA, and title of Vidya Vachaspadi, Akhila Bharatiya Vidyut Parishad Varanasi. Kandalur Shala offers his sincere gratitude and appreciation for his gracious presence and blessings, and also inaugurating the International Seminar on Indian Knowledge Systems. The citation presented to Professor Sannidhanam Sudarshana Sharma on 16th July 2021 at Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala, India, signed by Professor P.C. Murali Madhavan, Special Officer, Kandalur Shala. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Narayan Kochi. Now I request Sri Madhavan Nambudri to present the citation to Professor Mikhail Witzel. Professor Madhavan Nambudri, Vice President of the Kandalur Sabha.
Thank you, sir. Namaskaram. With great honor and respect, Kandalur Shala highly commends Dr. Professor Michael Witzel for his outstanding contribution and exemplary work in Vedic literature as a teacher, guide, and philosopher. Professor Michael Witzel was born in 1943 in Germany and received education at University of Tübingen, University of Erlangen, Nuremberg in Germany, and acquired PhD in 1972 and had exposure to Mimamsa philosophy at Tribhuvan University of Kathmandu under Naib Guruji Junath Pandit. He held teaching positions of Sanskrit at universities at Germany, the Netherlands, and Wales professor at Harvard University. He held coveted positions such as Director of Nepal German Manuscript Preservation Project, Director of Nepal Research Center of the German Oriental Society at Kathmandu, and Research Fellow at Collège de France, Paris, and visiting professor at Tokyo University, as well as visiting researcher to RH in Kyoto. He was chairman of the Department of South and Central Asian and Old and Middle Iranian at University of Leiden, chairman of Dutch Indological Association and chair of Department of Sanskrit and Indian Studies, and founding chair of the Committee on South Asian Studies at Harvard University. President of Association for the Language in Prehistory and President of International Association for Comparative Mythology at Boston. He was editor of several international journals as well as Harvard Oriental series. Mitchell is a renowned German and American philologist, comparative mythologist, and Indologist. He is an author of Indian Sanskrit texts, particularly the Vedas and Indian history. He became Cabot Fellow, Faculty of Arts and Sciences, Harvard University, recognizing his book on comparative mythology. His main topics of scholarly research are the dialectics of Vedic Sanskrit, Old Indian history, the development of Vedic religion, and the linguistic prehistory of Indian subcontinent. He focused on the localization of Vedic texts and evidence contained in them for early Indian history, resulting in several books. He studied the various Vedic recensions and their importance for the geographical spread of Vedic culture across North India and beyond. He explored the linguistic aspect of earliest Indian history in a number of papers. His studies in the field resulted in a new scheme of historical comparative mythology that covers most of Eurasia and the Americas, that was pursued in a number of papers and in the book titled The Origins of the World's Mythologies, a magnum opus, and was praised by Professor of Sanskrit Frederick Smith. He organized several international conferences. He is bold enough to express his opinion without fear. Kandalur Shala adores and appreciates the lifelong strides by Michael Witzel in propagating Vedic knowledge for the betterment of the human civilization. His professional leadership qualities merit high respect and esteem. Kandalur Shala offers its sincere gratitude and appreciation for his gracious presence as guest of honor and also delivering the special lecture at the inaugural session of International Seminar on Indian Knowledge Systems. This citation is presented to Professor Michael Witzel on 16th of July 2021 at Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala, India. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madhavan Nambudiri. Now I request Dr. Pradeep Jyoti to present the citation to Professor Shashi Tiwari. Pradeep Jyoti.
Distinguished guests and participants, with a great honor and respect, Kandalur Shala highly commends Dr. Professor Shashi Tiwari for her outstanding contribution and exemplary work in Vedic literature as a teacher, guide, and philosopher. Dr. Shashi Tiwari, recipient of Certificate of Honor from the President of India, is a well-known Vedic and Sanskrit scholar, gold medalist from the Lucknow University. Dr. Shashi Tiwari served as a teaching faculty in Sanskrit department of Maitreyi College and University of Delhi for about 40 years. She worked as a visiting professor in the Hindu University of America, Orlando, USA, for a short time, and still she is an adjunct faculty of Hindu University of America. Dr. Sashi Tiwari has worked essentially for the promotion of Vedic knowledge as the president and General Secretary of Vida Association for Vedic Studies, which is called WAVES, which is a registered and multidisciplinary academic society established in 1996. In this reference, especially worth mentioning are 24 national conferences with international participation, which she successfully organized in different parts of India and Nepal. She has herself actively participated in more than 36 international conferences held in USA, Italy, Canada, Nepal, and South Korea. Dr. Tiwari has been honored with more than 27 academic awards from various universities and various academic institutions of India since 1989. She was awarded the most honor from the highest honor of award from the President of India for Sanskrit in the year 2015. Dr. Tiwari has published 34 books related to Vedic and Sanskrit subjects in Hindi, English, and Sanskrit languages. Her 5 books received 8 awards for the Sanskrit from the Sanskrit academies. Her new 4 books based on Sankaracharya, spirituality, and Vedic studies are just released in 2021. Kandalu Shala offers his sincere gratitude and appreciation for her gracious presence and blessing, and also delivering keynote paper at the inaugural session of International Seminar on Indian Knowledge System. This citation is presented to Dr. Professor Sashi Tiwari on 16 July 2021 at Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala, India. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pradeep Joji. Now we are coming to the closure of this inaugural session. I request Sri Subramaniam Musat to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. Namaste. Om Namas Sababhyas Sabhavadipyas Chavo Nama. Good evening to all. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to propose vote of thanks on this great occasion on behalf of Kandalu Shala and Kandalu Sabha. Respected Professor Murali Madhavan sir, Special Officer Kandalu Shala, and Professor Sanidhanam Sudarshana Sharma. And today is our guest of honor, Professor Michael Witzel, and Madam Professor Sashi Tiwari, Professor Radhakrishnan, and our Kandalu Shala President, Sri Narayanan Bhuti, Vice President Madhavan Nambudiri, Treasurer Pradeep Jodi, and our Kandalu Shala directors, Dr. Hariharan, Dr. Ramamurthy, and our all trust members and distinguished delegates present here. Good evening to all of you. On behalf of Kandalu Shala and Kandalu Sabha, I greet you all to this great occasion where we have been able to organize an international seminar on Indian knowledge systems, inquiry of roots and Vedic literature. We had our first session today, Vedas revealed and unrevealed. So we had a wonderful participation and wonderful session, and you made it a wonderful session. So first, I thank one and all for that. Now coming to my duty of proposing very specifically, I had to propose my thanks to our presidential paper presented by our Murali Madhavan sir, who is our special officer of Kandalu Shala, on the topic of non-revealed text in Vedic literature, the Vedangas, literature of transition. Somebody asked me, why a special officer, Murali Madhavan sir, is special officer. One of my friend asked me, I had to just reply him that he is very special because such a wonderful session he has been organizing, wonderful seminar he organized for 27 invited papers on Vedas and Vedangas, and that too a very young baby like Kandalu Shala, who was only just completed 6 months, 6 to 7 months only we have completed after our registration. But he has organized, he has pulled all the scholars from all over the world. That is the speciality of him. And today he has presented a wonderful paper. That is again his speciality. And once again, tomorrow he may be the master of ceremony. That is his speciality. Again, he will be doing welcoming address. That is also his speciality. Again, he will teach the students who are going to join in Kandalu Shala in a professorial manner. That is his speciality. So he is in all the way a special officer for Kandalu Shala who leads, directs in all our activities. So my special thanks and gratitude to Murali Madhavan sir on this occasion. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Then coming to our professor, second inaugural speech has been delivered by Vedaratnam Vedavajaspati, Professor Sannidhanam Sudarshana Sharma, Vice Chancellor of Sri Venkateswara Vedic University, Tirupati. And of course, is a talk on intonations and interpretations. Our Dr. Radhakrishnan sir has been explained and condensed all the professorial talk, what all the contents and everything has been condensed. It is, Kandalu Shala is so proud to have you with us on this first inaugural day for giving our inaugural speech and also for inaugurating our sessions, like session of this first session itself by inaugurating these sessions. So thank you, sir, on behalf of Kandalu Shala and all the delegates present here. I salute you and propose my vote of thanks to you, sir. Then we are so fortunate today because we have got a wonderful, great professor from Harvard University, Boston, USA, Professor Michael Witzel. He is our guest of honor today, and he has been giving a wonderful lecture on historicity of Vedas. It was a very enlightening lecture, and that too, he has, with a PowerPoint presentation, he described very wonderfully the historicity of with all Vedic background, what all, because he has been connecting with all the literature backup, the things. Of course, many may be having difference of opinion on definitely the historicity. There is a lot of difference of opinion for the scholars, but it is a subject to be discussed, and it is a subject to be thought of, and it is a subject to be, again, for our future reference. It is a wonderful subject, and you have been covered it with very nicely. Thank you so much, sir, for your busy schedule and at this time to cooperating with us. And you, in this busy schedule, you have been giving a wonderful lecture on to Kandalu Shala. We are very grateful to you, sir, on behalf of Kandalu Shala and all the delegates present, and my own personal behalf. I thank you. I propose my vote of thanks to you. Then we have been so honored with the auspicious presence of our Professor Shashi Tiwari, Madam. She is the chairperson of the World Association of Vedic Studies, Delhi. She has given a keynote paper on the origin of environmental science from Vedas. Of course, that is most discussed paper. And in fact, our Vedas and our Bharatiya Samskaram is always, we stood for the protection of nature, protection of Mother Earth. And we were the Mother Earth, how to protect Mother Earth. We were always arguing for that. And of course, I think the future generation, our Bharatiya Samskaram, we should be able to lead the whole world against the environmental protection. For behalf of environmental protection, we should stand united for all the environmental protection. She has definitely given right directions from quoting all the wonderful Rigvedic suktas from that all Rigvedic suktas and all. She has done a wonderful lecture, and we all, the participants, definitely would have been enlightened with your noble thoughts. And I thank you, madam. Thank you so much for your gracious presence on this occasion. We are very grateful to you. Thank you so much. Then, of course, our Professor K.P. Parvati, HOD Sanskrit Department, VT Bhattadri College of Palakkad. She blessed the occasion with her invocation, Rigvedic invocation. That too, see, when we were starting this 5 days of sessions with a lot of activities, your words of wisdom and invocation definitely bless the occasion. So thank you, madam, for your nice presentation on invocation. Thank you so much. Then I would like to thank Professor C.S. Radhakrishnan, sir, member of our academic council. And you have been doing multi job. In fact, you have been doing a smooth conduction of today's function in the stipulated time. You have been controlling all the sessions in a wonderful manner, as well as you have been doing a great gap between the speaker and the audience. Actually, we're all, some students are there, scholars are there, but you have been standing as a professor in between the speaker and the student. You have been condensing all the topics in a very nice manner. I've been, whoever is not unable to digest the topic, because they were all been dealing with great topics, great events of even the historical events of the Vedas, all these things, you have been that professorial way you condensed the version. So thank you so much, sir. Your presence has been very graceful to the Kandalur Shala. You are part of us. You are part of our Kandalur Shala. So thank you so much. May God bless you with all fortunes. Thank you so much. Then I would like to again take this opportunity to thank once again the great esteemed participants who have been present here, the scholarly participants and our Kandalur Sabha trustee members, as well as our president Narayanan Bhatti, vice president Madhavan Nambudiri, our treasurer Pradeep Jodhi, and all the office bearers of Kandalur Shala and Kandalur Sabha. They are all the backbones of the our all activities. So they are all giving good guidance and good support for the noble activity. So thank you one and all. Once again, I thank all the speakers and all the delegates on behalf of Kandalur Shala. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Subramanian Musat. Now we close it with a Shanti Pata.
Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhave. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.